Hello there, dear listener. We hope you're enjoying this lovely discussion. If you're not already aware, this show is part of a podcast network called KWAZ Radio, a Pan-African Nationalist and Garveyite network come to showcasing the rich and varied thoughts of African people. We have an exciting lineup of shows that we think you'll enjoy, including
the Victor Medicine Podcast.
I think black people require too much buy-in. Like, we constantly have to sell black people on things that are beneficial to black people.
The Pro-Black Perspective Podcast.
I'm fearful that our people are not really studying how to get ahead, and we're kind of, continually staying behind.
The Harsh Reality Podcast.
It really don't matter. I think people so dumbed down, it wouldn't matter what you reveal to them. They still are in the matrix. They're in the simulation. They're going to keep doing what they did their lemmings. So it really don't matter.
The Learning Curve Podcast.
Sexual access has never given you economic empowerment. The only person who has ever been economically empowered by a sexual relationship is the wasp and his woman.
The Cathedral Cheek Show.
When we start rising up to fight for our own, I guarantee you they'll stop doing what they're doing. I guarantee you they would have let their brother go. They was waiting to see what black folks was going to do.
Brother Bakari Podcast.
Black people love to claim folks that hate them, right? They're a slave master, and they are ashamed of who they really are.
The Forecast Radio.
Like, if you pray to the same deity as, like, your enemy, and that God blesses your enemy more than you may want to reconsider who you praying to,
And Tanzan, African Mind.
Africans generally are welcoming of everyone. Sometimes, to my consternation, I think that they should be less, welcoming.
If you love our podcast network, we would be grateful if you could rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. Follow us on social media, like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, and check out our website at www.kwazradio.com for more information. Thank you for tuning in. And now, back to the program.
All right. Peace, family. We got Tyler's asking, when are you going to Botswana or Uganda? The thing about going places is, I think I'm gonna stick with Tanzania for a while. I'm writing right now my book about multinationalism, right? And I don't know if you guys can hear me well, but multinationalism, basically the idea that you want to actually let me see if I could actually read the summary. Did I write it yet? Yeah, choose a nation or two and foster their development and unity. Part of me kind of wanted to say imperialism, low key, but I'm gonna be canceled. I'm already canceled if you look at the other stuff, but like you have to. I'll say it this way: I actually knew a sister in Uganda, and I showed her a video of this like some people trying to attract people to Africa, trying to promote Africa as a location. And one of the things she told me was that it makes it look like Africa is a tourist spot, or a place to retire, as opposed to a place that needs development, So when it comes to, Uganda, Botswana, I would go if I had if I had a plan to develop there, like I could visit, obviously, but I would go if I had something that I know I want to develop there, but I would have to do that after I develop in Tanzania, So one of these chapters is actually interesting. One of these chapters in my book is going to be titled Parsimonies, right? Because I wanted to talk about economics, but our economics is too abstract, too so on and so forth. I think I'm going to stress in this book the choices that you can make, right? And one of the choices you can make as an individual is being parsimonious, right? And so parsimonious contrasted to prodigality. Again, these are words that we don't know. One is parsimonious is obviously being cheap, and prodigal is being like like spending your money unwisely, pretty much, right? Uh, that said, I'm going to try to make this chapter kind of like Garvey's advice, kind of like Adam Smith's advice, but also kind of like just simplify it, really. Like, realistically, parsimonious is the law of gain. Parsimonious is how you get wealth, but say not in a nutshell, it's you buy necessities first, money second, luxuries third. Okay? So you have to get your necessities first. I have a house in America, obviously. I don't have a house in Africa yet. So I have to focus on buying a house in Africa. That's one of my necessities, right? The next one is you have to focus on buying money. Obviously, you put your needs before your money, okay? You put your needs before your money because you'll just die if you don't have your needs settled, right? The last one is luxuries, okay? Now, Botswana and Uganda, if I don't have a need over in Botswana or Uganda, and I don't have a money opportunity, right? That's development. If I don't have a money opportunity in Uganda or Botswana, right, as yet, and the reason why I don't is because I don't really have the money opportunity in Tanzania just yet. So I can't really go and get it in Uganda, right? If I don't have the necessities and the money, Uganda and Botswana are going to be luxuries. And that's where we mess up. Because actually, right now, my money is, money's still good, obviously. But it's being challenged by, I got people who owe me money, let's say, right? But the people who owe me money, they're going on vacations. See, and that's why in this parsimonious thing, you also have to judge a person based off of what do they buy, how like what are their spending habits, what are their buying habits, are they buying necessities, are they buying money, or are they buying luxuries? And when you see that a man is buying luxuries, you can't necessarily have that relationship with him anymore. You get what I'm saying? You have to start saying, oh, wait a second, there's something wrong with you if you buying luxuries when you didn't buy your necessities yet and you damn sure didn't buy your money yet. So yeah, I mean, like, I would definitely, sure, Uganda was the first country I was going to go to. But I never did. All the same, and Botswana has the diamond industry, but I don't have diamond money. You know what I'm saying? like I don't got diamond money. I'm gonna tell you up front. So that's why I was thinking about it. Yeah, Tyler. Let me tell you, man. This Ugandan sister was one of the Ugandan sisters I met was fire, but it is what it is. Things fall apart. Kenyan women are fire. I knew a Kenyan woman who was also fire. You saying on YouTube though? Shoot, man, you gotta go. You gotta go. A lot of like one of the first intellectual woman I've met was in Kenya. Was a Kenyan. She was rich too, but it is what it is. Tyler says parsimonious. Yeah, so parsimonious. Oh, okay, my fault. I don't know how to pronounce these words, man. But it is actually in Wealth of Nations. So yeah, unwilling to spend money or use resources, stingy or frugal. Yeah, I mean that. So Adam Smith is actually telling us that these are the people. The parsimonious people are the people that advance the economy. Because one of the other chapters I want to talk about is technology, and I was just literally grilling ChatGPT, matter of fact, about machines versus devices, because I want to just want to emphasize, us, being along with machines, but then I looked into it and there's like 6 different types of machines, and I was like, oh, okay, let me see if I could find something from this Chat GPT or something. Just as a writer's assistance, so I don't have to read 1,000 pages. No, because the pages it was just weird. All right. But my point is, yeah, like the people who were buying machines back in the day were, the people who were buying machines back in the day were the people who saved their money, right? Because the thing is this, you have money, you could, like I said, you could buy three things. You could buy necessities, you could buy money, or you could buy luxuries, right? So, I could say, for instance, when I got a little bit of money from after my mother passed, right? I got a little bit of money, well, not a little bit, but I got some money when my mother passed, right? My brothers got money when my mother passed, right? Some of them were like, okay, time to buy some drugs. Now I ain't gonna hold you. I might have bought some, stocks that didn't work. but there's a difference between saying, look, I'm going to buy some stocks and I'm going to buy some drugs. You could do both. Or for instance, my other brother was like, shit, it's enough money for a car. And he got himself a nice luxury car, right? Well, I don't want to say it was a luxury. I mean, he had his own money, so, whatever. But the point is, and of course, he already has his own money. So it's not like, you got to spend all your money on, getting more money. But my point is that there are people who are, how they spend their money, that's how you're supposed to look at people. How they spend their money. And so one of the things I'm going to do in my next book, and I don't want to talk too much about my book because I know people tuned in to read about the other brother, but I don't want to talk too much about my book. But what I'm saying is that one of the things I want to teach, really, or want to emphasize among our people is, one, you have to have good spending habits. And two, you have to judge people by their spending habits. Because that was another thing in some of that Wealth of Nations was that he said, look, never loan your money to somebody who's doesn't spend money well. Like, the people who banks loan money to are the people who spend their money well. Because the bank says, okay, well, at least, like, for instance, if you have savings, like, for instance, if I said, look, like say Tyler says, hey, look, I want to borrow $10,000, right? If Tyler has $100,000 in the bank, right, and he just wants to borrow $10,000, right, he doesn't want to move it around, that makes a lot of sense. And if Tyler, because now you already know Tyler has savings. He saves his money, right? And again, I'm just giving a comparison between 100,000 and 10,000, right? He saves his money. He's not spending, recklessly on himself. He's not necessarily, if he goes on vacations or whatever kind of lifestyle he has, he still puts his money to the side for a rainy day. You say, okay, yeah, I could trust you with $10,000, or even if you say he has 100,000, you could even say, oh, I could trust you with 200,000 because at the end of the day, you were able to save up 100,000, right? On the other side, a man who has I ain't got no money. Can you give me $1,000 to get back on my feet, right? But let's say their income is $100,000 a year, right? Their income is $100,000 a year, but they're asking you for $1,000 because they don't got no money. Right? Even Adam Smith was saying, look, you're not getting that money back. And I can tell you, yeah, people would ask me for money. They'd be like, hey, can I borrow some money? I'm like, yeah, sure. They're like, I let me borrow some money because I got money in the bank. Like, I mean, I got a good income. So let me borrow this money. It's not as much as I make. You get this back in a month. I was told that by a brother. I ain't never seen that money again. You know what I'm saying? Every time you talk to them, they're like, yeah, man, nah, things is tough, man. Things are. And so you're just like, okay. You have to look at a person's spending. You have to look at a person's savings. You got to look at a person's, and not just, because like I said, when you buy money, that's you, like that could be you working, right? But you can't just look at that. You have to look at what are they spending on? Because this same person who owes me money, right? They're like, yo, look how I took out this lady, or look at me and this and so forth. So it's like, that's so back to the question, if I were to go to Botswana or Uganda, it's like, do I have something ready? Like, do I have my shit together in Tanzania as yet to go there? I don't. You see what I'm saying? And because I don't, like I would just be going on vacation, and it's like, vacation is nice, but it's not, but like, if I were just going on vacations, right? You should just look at you should just look at me and be like, my dude, come on, there's more things to be done, right? So Tyler says, financial literacy can be learned, especially in this age of information. Yep, my money is put into, for some reason they got like a heart here, additive 3D metal printing shop. Yeah, this dude is, I tell you, man, Tyler is the beast. See, I got, they say 5 concurrent viewers. and 2 likes. Because of what Tyler just said, y'all give me some more likes, please. That's all I'm gonna say. Anyway, I'm just gonna try to take advantage of Tyler being here. But all right, let's get to the book. 4.3. I don't know if we should just finish chapter 4 or not, or if we should just go halfway through it, but we'll see. So, continuing political military developments in Africa, 1500 to 1885. Modern African nationalist historians correctly stress that Africa had a meaningful past long before the coming of Europeans. They also stress that Africans made their own history long after coming into contact with Europe, and indeed right up to the period of colonization. That African centered approach to the continent's past is quite compatible with one which equally emphasizes the transformatory role of external forces such as overseas trading slaves, gold, ivory, etc. The reconciliation of the two approaches is facilitated by bearing in mind the following two factors. So, by the way, I got a new mic. If anybody wants to know, I'm gonna open up this video on my phone so that I can one which equally emphasizes the transformatory role of external forces. Okay, so I could read the chat while I'm reading. So the external and mainly European impact up to 1885 was very uneven in geographic terms, with the coast being obviously more exposed. Commerce with Europeans affected different aspects of African life in varying degrees, with the political, military, and ideological apparatuses being virtually untouched. So they're saying the political, military, and ideological apparatuses in Africa were virtually untouched by commerce, right? I don't know if that's true, but it is what it is. Dynamic features of independent African evolution and development, as illustrated in Chapter 2, continue to operate after 1500. It has already been argued that it would be misleading to try and compartmentalize Africa into areas that were affected by slave trading and those which were not, for the continent as a whole had to bear the cost. And see, this is another thing, because when we talk about polygamy, and I used to be a little more against polygamy, not so much now, but I used to be, but partly because I recognize that, look, you can't compartmentalize where Africa was affected by slavery. And the thing is that slavery kind of impacted marriage in the sense of there would be less men available, you know? And when there's less men available, women start to pair, like women start to double up, you know? Uh, there's also the matter of, like let's say if you have more wealthy people, women start to double. Like if there's more wealth inequality, women will start to pair up too. You know, and that's just something that happens in the West too. Like you see with the guy, whatever that celebrity's name is, but he has multiple women pregnant at the moment, and it's like yeah, because he's wealthy. And not to say that only wealthy people make multiple women pregnant, but if women consider hypergamy, right, which is the idea of marrying in a class above you, right, or even procreating in a class above you, uh, uh, like greater wealth uh, inequality will make for more like greater wealth inequality in men, and of course greater wealth inequality between men and women will make the greatly wealthy men more more marriable, you know. Even beyond a woman's quote unquote jealousy. Anyway, so let's see. Let me see. Tyler says, "Oh no, there's no other comments." Oh, actually, let me see. Let me change my chat to. Uh, Okay, I'll just change my chat to all chat. So development continued in certain areas such as Central Africa because the population there was free to pursue a path dictated by the interplay between African people and the African environment in the particular localities. Besides, there were achievements even in those societies under the heavy bombardment of slaving. Slave trading led to a commercial domination of Africa by Europe within the context of international trade. In very few instances did Europeans manage to displace African political authorities in the various social systems. So African states in close contact with Europe in the pre-colonial era nevertheless had scope for political maneuvers, and their evolution could and did continue. So again, this is not completely true. I want people to understand that like fundamental to your political structure is your economy. So once the economy becomes dominated, the politics are dominated. You know? And what does that mean? That means that if all right, for instance, like this. if commercially, oh, all right, like OnlyFans right now. If commercially you can sell images of your body online, right? Then politically, like the politics will form around that sale. You get what I'm saying? And the culture will form around that politic. You know, uh, so the contrast, you can't sell pictures of your children. You get what I'm saying? And the reason why you can't is because like essentially like there might be an economy for that, obviously, but then the political structure is shaped against it, and so what happens with the so obviously that's something that's obviously immoral to us. Slave trading would have been immoral to us too, but the political structures in Africa allowed for it. You see? So to say and that being because of the Europeans, right? So to say, oh, the Europeans didn't affect it is like that's not true because clearly, these Europeans were coming in and building like castles, and prisons and dungeons right next door to, African kingdoms. And then how the citizens of those African kingdoms would react to that, right? Um, like it had its own political impact, you know, because all of a sudden you have, like if you were to just try to put yourself into the shoes of, our ancestors, really, right? You had dungeons and castles and foreigners right next door coming in, raiding, and doing all sorts of stuff, telling you to move, telling you to so and so forth. You now have to live under your own quote unquote autonomous political structure that's beholden to these traders or these enslavers. It's not as easy as people would think. So uh, Tyler Solomon says, I would be fine investing directly into Africa with you as the arbiter or middleman. Hey, that's a compliment if ever. Yeah, but I need to. The thing is, I don't own property. I mean, I don't. Sorry, I can't own property in Africa. So it's like that's the big problem when it comes to like our situation in diaspora or our situation not being citizens, and that's why you know why part of why I want to write this book. I want to write it and translate it into different languages because you need certain qualities among our people. You're not going to find it. I was just listening to one of my old podcasts about the women I was talking with, and how I had like two top candidates. Who at the time were both like, hey, why not both? But things didn't go according to plan, so it's only one of them. But even that one is still not as peachy as I would have hoped. Not to say not as peachy, but it's complicated. Really, like I said, I have a setback in regards to, like, let's say, an American business endeavor, and so that kind of has a trickle down effect. All the same, what I'm saying about these women was that one was prodigal and one was parsimonious. So one, I told you guys, had a bar, and if her customers, like, she would drink at her own bar, okay, get high on her own supply, you know, and the bar has minimal profits, so drinking at your own bar is foolish. Now she alleges, oh, it's because the customers, buy me drinks, right? But I was telling her, look, if a customer buys you a drink, you don't actually have to drink it per se. You could fabricate that you're drinking, like you could, the customer says, hey, have a beer on me. And you say, sure. And then you open a bottle that's actually water. You get what I'm saying? And you actually filled with water. You drink that water, and then you come away with all the profit. Like you come away with like everything. You come away with like pure profit as opposed to, reduced profit, right? Because you can also sell an actual can, like you actually could sell a real bar. Now, granted, somebody might ask you to drink right in front of them, but all the same, what I'm saying is, drink in front of them and say that they buy the beer and they say, okay, you take it. You say, yeah, okay, sure. But then you can also just do the slip, under the table. Um, uh, what I'm saying is that, but also I'll say this: I had another friend who visited her and saw that she wasn't bought a drink; she just drank her own drink, right? Um, Again, luxuries before necessities before money, right? Whereas the other woman, in fact, I could say that she had a food stall, and she, yeah, she would only eat what was being thrown away. You know, basically, a long story short, the qualities of you might not have citizenship, which is bad, but then on top of not having citizenship, like let's say you can't own property, you might need to rely on somebody there who can own property. But how you can tell who you can trust with your money is very very difficult. You know, it's very very difficult. So you have to go between, is somebody poor because of their low income, or is somebody poor because of their bad their bad spending. And if somebody has good income and no savings, then that's somebody who you shouldn't trust with money, right? Unless they have, like I said, unless they have a house or something like that, then sure. But if they don't have a house, and they, like say they're renting and they have a good income, then yeah, forget that person. You know. Let me see if I can find that. Let me see if I can find that post about the three questions to ask in terms of African, instead of Africa. It said the three questions for visiting Africa is: what language can you speak? What can you afford to rent? Right? And what property rights can you navigate? So in Tanzania, the language is Swahili, the rent is low, but you don't have property rights as a foreigner unless you find a local partner. So what that means is, like I said, I could go there and buy a house, but I can't buy a house. You know what I mean? So what I can do is I can get a woman and then technically buy a house under her name. The trouble is, you have a woman, like if somebody else has the property under their name, right? Particularly if you're not married, um, they could just take your house. You get what I'm saying? Like you're basically buying a house for another person, and that could be tons of money. Um, but then you don't have that house. You get what I'm saying? So, it's really, really careful. You got to be really, really careful when it comes to um, like the continent and what you can do and what you can't do. Now, obviously, you can get citizenship. For instance, in Tanzania, you can get citizenship if you live there for 10 years, or in Nigeria, you can get citizenship if you live there for 10 years, or if you're a woman. And I think in Nigeria, but I wouldn't go to Nigeria. But if you're a woman, or even a woman in Tanzania, if you're a woman, you can get citizenship if you marry a man, right? Um, the obviously a lot of us are not. I mean, a lot of like half of us are not women. But but the thing about that though is that now if your sister marries somebody, she can own property as a citizen. Now maybe that property is owned partially by that man though, right? But again, not 100% by the man, right? It's owned by the man, and then you could technically have property under your sister's name. That would be a nice workaround. But obviously, you need a sister to do that for you, like a literal biological sister. Because again, if it's just another American, you run into the same problem, or another foreigner, you run into the same problem. Like even if they're Nigerian and they're in Tanzania, you run into the same problem of, well, I can't, so on and so forth. I think though Kenya might have, like it might have more lenient laws, but I'm not 100% sure. I just know that the president recently welcomed, the president recently welcomed more visas from African people if they're interested in business. So I could imagine maybe he might open it to more ownership. In Tanzania, you can't really own anything as a foreigner except for like mining industry and I think the energy sector, you know? But again, who like if you don't have mining or energy money, then you have a problem. Brother Bakari's here. He says peace and black power to Oni and the chat. So peace and black power to Brother Bakari. So yeah, let's keep going back to the thing. So yeah, let's just whatever political maneuvers evolution. So military conquest of Africa awaited the years of imperialist scramble. In pre-colonial centuries of contact with Europe, African armies were in existence, and with all the socio-political implications which attached to an armed sector in society. Equally important was the fact that direct imports from Europe in the cultural and ideological sphere were virtually nil. Christianity tried sporadically and ambivalently to make an impact on some parts of the continent, but most of the few missionaries in places like the Congo, Angola, and Upper Guinea concentrated on blessing Africans as they were about to be launched across the Atlantic into slavery. As it was, Christianity continued only in Ethiopia, where it had indigenous roots. Elsewhere, there flourished Islam and other religions which had nothing to do with European trade. As before, religion continued to act as an element of the superstructure, which were crucial in the development of the state. So long as there is a political power, so long as people can be mobilized to use weapons, and so long as society has the opportunity to define its own ideology, culture, etc., then the people of that society have some control over their own destiny. In spite of constraints such as those imposed as the African continent slips into orbit as a satellite of capitalist Europe, after all, although historical development is inseparable from material conditions and the state of technology, it is also partially controlled by a people's consciousness at various stages. That is part of the interdependence of base and superstructure alluded to at the outset. So again, that's a Marxist literature. Revolution is the most dramatic appearance of a conscious people or state class on the stage of history, but to a greater and lesser extent, the ruling class in any society is always engaged in the developmental process as conscious instruments of change or conservatism. Attention in this section will be focused on the political sphere and its power companion, the military. In those areas, Africans were able to excel even in the face of slave trading. So it looks like he's going to talk about revolution. But it's interesting that he says the ruling class in any society is always engaged in the developmental process, so on and so forth. Attention to this section will be focused on the political sphere. So I like what he's saying. It's really convoluted. You know, you're talking about the military and being a power companion to the political sphere. You know, I like that. But, you know, what he's saying, he's not really saying much at the moment, but, you know, it is what it is. This is an interesting book. I don't know how you guys feel, but this is an interesting book.
They're bad spending.
Let me see.
And if some.
Oh, cool. Highly Favored is here. Peace and Black Power. Peace, Highly Favored. Appreciate you joining us this morning. Let's see if... all right. So, political military development in Africa from 1500 to 1885 meant that African social collectives have become more capable of defending the interests of their members, as opposed to the interests of people outside the given community. It also meant that the individual in a politically mature and military strong state could be free from external threat of physical removal. He would have more opportunities to apply his own skill in fields as diversified as minstrelsy, which I think is related to the church, and bronze working under the protection of the state. He could also use his creativity and inventiveness to refine the religion of his people, or to work out a more manageable constitution, or to contribute to new techniques of war, or to advance agriculture and trade. Of course, it is also true that the benefits of all contributions went mainly to a small section of African society, both within and without the zone of slaving. For as communalism receded, the principle of egalitarian distribution was disregarded. These various points can be illustrated by concrete historical examples drawn from all over the continent during the pre-colonial period in question. What do I want to say about this? I think it's... So basically what he's saying is this. You need to have a military. A military allows you to be creative and religious and, you know, have constitutional and have advanced agriculture. You know? I really... So I'm going to get in trouble for my next book. Because basically the next book is going to be about 21 choices that you have as an individual. And one of the choices is this. You can choose to be racist. You can choose to be racist. And the idea is this, that realistically choosing your race, because like think about the Yorubas. Choosing your race, right, means that you can now have advanced agriculture and trade. You can now have a manageable... basically, there's going to be foreigners who are going to try to destroy you. Like, that's just the way of the world. The way of the world is that there's going to be something else that's trying to destroy you. If you don't defend your race, your species. your subspecies. On a fundamental genetic level, we are subject to genetic annihilation. Like, if you even think about like who we are really as humans, we are these organisms, these life forms that carry around DNA. And that DNA can replicate inside of that DNA can replicate and combine and become something else, and then your DNA remains in that individual, that new individual. So right now my son's walking around with my DNA inside of him, right, or half of my DNA inside of him, and then if I have grandchildren, they're walking around with a quarter of my DNA, right, and so on and so forth. But that DNA can be wiped out eventually. Can be or can't be. Like can be, and eventually, let's say after 16 generations, it may no longer replicate. Like no strand of me whatsoever. But I belong to a wider DNA, like a wider gene pool that makes it so that technically it doesn't have to be that I as an individual DNA sequence is eliminated indefinitely. You see what I'm saying? It's complicated. We'll talk about it. We'll talk about it in time. But yeah, we're gonna articulate that in time. But like for instance, even the Yoruba is not necessarily a genetic group, but there is a Yoruba genetics gene group. I look at it like this: we humans are organisms made up of microorganisms, but we also form macroorganisms. That macroorganism you could say is the Yoruba, but I would say that macroorganism is the African. And this macroorganism can be annihilated because I would say there were racial groups that were annihilated. Tons of them, maybe. Who knows? But in recent history, the Native American is gone, more or less. The Tasmanian is gone. The Australian is gone, right? And this was because of Wazungu. Let's see. Brother Bakari says, only I'm about to do a 3.5 to 5 mile with 20-pound backpack while listening to you, so keep it interesting as usual. Yeah, man, no doubt. I'm about to do some walking too. No, I'm just recording this so I can walk later. All right. So in a previous discussion, the Yoruba state of Oyo was merely listed as one of the outstanding representatives of African development up to the eve of European arrival in the 15th century. The remarkable 14th and 15th century artistic achievement of Oyo, of its parent state of life, and of the related state of Benin has been well studied because of the preservation of ivory, terracotta, and bronze sculptures. It is clear that the earliest bronzes were the best and that there was a deterioration in execution and sensitivity from the 16th through to the 18th century. However, politically, states such as Oyo and Benin did continue to prosper for a very long time after the arrival of Europeans on the West African coast. Since Oyo and the Yoruba people were within an intensive area of slave trading, their fate between 1500 and 1885 is of considerable importance. The kingdom of Oyo kept fairly clear of any involvement with slave trading until the late 18th century. Instead, its people concentrated on local production and trade, and on the consolidation and expansion of the trade. Indeed, although the nucleus of the Oyo kingdom had already been established in the 15th century, it was during the next 3 centuries that it expanded to take control of most of what was later termed Western Nigeria, large zones north of the river Niger, and a whole of what is now Dahomey. In effect, it was an empire ruled over by an alifin in conjunction with an aristocracy. Again, organization is oligarchy, right? It was in the 16th and 17th and 18th century that the subtle constitutional mechanisms which regulated relations between the alifin and his principal subjects and between the capital and the provinces were crystallized. Insofar as Oyo had an interest in the coast, it was an outlet more for cloth than for slaves. Being some distance inland, the Yoruba of Oyo concentrated on relations with the hinterland, thereby connecting with the western Sudanic trading zone. It was from the north that Oyo got the horses which made its armies feared and respected. Oyo is a prime example of that African development which had its roots deep in the past and the contradiction between man and environment. Its people continue to develop on the basis of forces which they did not consciously manipulate, as well as through the deliberate utilization of political techniques. Early in the 19th century, Oyo and Yoruba land in general began to export captives in considerable numbers. They were obtained partly by military campaigns outside Yoruba land, but also through local slave procuring. Local slave procuring involved kidnapping, armed raids, uncertainty, and disunity. Those features, together with internal constitutional tensions and an external threat from the Islamic North, brought about the downfall of the Oyo Empire by about 1830. The famous Yoruba ancestral home of Ife was also despoiled and its citizens turned into refugees because of quarrels among the Yoruba over kidnapping for sale into slavery. But it was tested. So again, the Yoruba became devastated. They last 300 years. And by the way, 300 years. What is 300 years? 300 years is how long America was a country, or just about how long America was a country. So Yoruba had this kingdom for about as long as American history is. Okay, let me see. So some people might say no, because America was 1776, I think, right, which is not 300 years ago. Oh, but it's almost like 250 years ago, about. Um, but like obviously there was some time before, like there was some like people didn't just people America like as soon as 1776 happened. There was something involved here already, right? And I'm not saying it was 1726, but you get what I'm saying. 300 years is about like America's time span, right? So you have them here, but then they're existing in a land where around them the Europeans are encroaching and the Europeans are dominating the coast more and more, greater and greater. And then eventually they also get into it and their entire civilization collapses. And so the Yoruba right now are some of the good people, if you will, in Nigeria, especially hoping to get their own country. But you know, this is the history like their history goes way back. And bear in mind that these could have been your ancestors. Well, assuming that you're in the diaspora, these could have been your ancestors. You know, obviously some people will know if like if they're not in the diaspora, they will know if these were their ancestors or not. But still, but it was testimony to the level of development in that part of Africa that within a few years the inhabitants were able to reconstruct new political states, notably those of New Oyo, Ibadan, Ijaye, Abeokuta, and Ijibu. So Ibadan, I know that's in Nigeria right now. Each centered on a town and with enough land for successful agriculture. Until the British arrived to kindly impose order in Nigeria, the Yoruba people kept experimenting various political forms, with heavy emphasis on the military and keeping to the religion of their forefathers. So again, military, and of course their own religion. Being conscious of territorial, and religion is just philosophy, but yeah, being conscious of territorial boundaries. Oh, let me say something about the Yoruba actually. So actually, I think I published it in my second book, the Pro-Black Compendium, right? There was this kind of summary of the Yoruba faith, and you know, it's just like maybe 13 lines or something, 13 quotes. One of the quotes though is that men are the garden. No, men are the fence and women are the garden. You know, I'm going to adapt that for my next book. But what I'm saying is that, you know, the Yoruba had this sexual binary. You know, had these. You know, for me, I'm going to articulate as, you know, gender roles. It had these gender roles where men were supposed to protect women, you know, whereas women, you know, can be that productive force in a society in the sense of, you know, reproduction and you know, they're protected so that they can reproduce children, but not just so that they can reproduce children, but also like they're with the children, you know, which is good, right? That kind of a healthy sexual binary as a philosophy, as a religion, is very different and distinct from what we see in the West. You know, so there's this book when I was I think I did a few classes, you know, whatever. But one of the books that they had was this book called Way of Seeing by John Berger, European book, and he's stressing how a lot of pre-colonial art had a sexual binary to it, you know. So the ancient Indians showed man and woman kind of standing as equals. The ancient Chinese, man and woman standing as equals. The ancient Africans, obviously, all throughout, man and woman standing as equals, right? But the ancient Europeans too up until up until the Abrahamic religions. So what happened with the Abrahamic religions is that it became, and it's not exclusively like that, because obviously there were the Assyrians who were also, a bunch of Bati boys. You know what I'm saying? But what I'm saying is that the Europeans, through Christianity particularly, started to, and Judaism obviously, started to subordinate women to men, right? In the sense that they were no longer like two parts of the same whole, or halves, or whatever, or complements, but the woman was a subordinate, right? And so I'm saying this to say that the Yoruba are an example of a religion that looked at man and woman, even if they had different roles, as a pair, right, or as equals in a sense. Well, not equals, but you get what I'm saying, right? And then, but the Christians looks at woman as like, oh, she's a sinner, oh, she caused the downfall of humanity, she got us kicked out of the Garden of Eden. You know what I mean? Like she, yeah, you get what I'm saying. All right, so anyway, being conscious of territorial boundaries, the inhabitants and rulers of any given state invariably became involved in clashes with neighboring states. You see what I'm saying? The state in the feudal epoch in Europe and Asia were particularly concerned with this military capacity. The ruling class comprised in whole or in part the professional fighting forces of the state. One rationalization by which they justified their enjoyment of the major portion of the surplus society was that they offered armed protection to the ordinary peasants or serfs. The generalization was as true of 19th century Yoruba land as it was of Prussia and Japan. Without a doubt, Africans in that region were proceeding along the lines of development leading to a social organization comparable to feudalism in Europe, Asia, and parts of Africa such as Ethiopia and the Maghreb, which were at the stage some centuries earlier. Yeah. In the Oyo Empire, the civil power was dominant and the military generals were servants of the king. Subsequently, however, the military took over effective political power. For instance, the Ayajaya state was founded by Kurunmi, said to have been the greatest Yoruba general of the troubled times following the fall of Oyo. Kurunmi established a personal military ascendancy in Ajaye. Ibadan was slightly different. I'm going to sound like a Nigerian when I say this, right? Ibadan was slightly different in that it was a group of military officers who collectively formed the political elite. Now remember, elites always rule nations. Remember that. Efforts to put civilians back in power were half-hearted and unsuccessful. After all, the town itself grew out of a military encampment. The city-state of Abeokuta perhaps made the most consistent effort to make the military an arm of the civil state. But what mattered most was the defense of the townships within the fortified walls of Abeokuta. Abeokuta's fortified walls became famous as the place where many rival armies met disaster, and under these circumstances, the Olugun, or war chiefs, were the social and political powers. Now bear in mind, you have this guy critiquing the civil powers are not. It's the military that's ruling. I don't mean to say about the ancestor, but he's critiquing it. But it's like this is a time of devastating war. You have to realize that when they're talking about what's going on in the 19th century, what's going on in the 1700s and the 1800s, African people are still enslaved in mass in Jamaica, in Cuba, in Brazil, in America, in Haiti. This is what's going on. The world is on fire for black people. And this person, and people are trying to make a living. They're trying to survive what's essentially an onslaught. And then we're looking at it from our little couches, this is not a real civilian government, but the military, yeah, of course. It's like look at Ukraine right now, right? Look at Ukraine right now. I tried to sound European, I couldn't. But anyway, look at Ukraine right now, right? Of course, their freaking president is going to be obsessed with war and warmongering, and generals are going to have a higher role while they're being invaded. Nobody's saying, well, where's civilian rule? And shut the fuck up. And the thing is that even in America, right? Even in America, you have the American government can, at any point in time, turn on what they call I don't know if it's called military rule, but basically they can turn on what's it called? But there's something I can't remember the name of it, but maybe somebody can type it. But like essentially they like kind of subordinate they kind of subordinate civil rule for military rule. And like they say that in their own constitution. Hey, look, at any point in time we could do this. And this is what we were doing in Africa. And then you have these socialists, like I said, the socialists. They'll be like, ew, ew, why would you have a military? Oh, the civil. Like, dude, this is an invasion of the continent that's been ongoing and is being encroached upon. And the Europeans during this time, not mentioned by this guy, are improving in technology at a rapid rate. So once they had these like short fired rifles, which are still very powerful and can still kill a man farther than a bow and arrow can, right? Oh yeah, martial law, real black gentleman. Yeah, martial law, exactly. Shit, I should have done that. Yeah, martial law. Even so these people are under martial law because because their continent was being invaded and encroached upon by what was and it still is what was at the time the most technologically advanced war machine on the planet. Okay, more advanced than the freaking Romans. Okay, who were probably more advanced than the freaking Egyptians. Not freaking, but more advanced than the Egyptians, the ancient Egyptians. The most advanced war machine to had invaded their continent, had been encroaching on their countries and their kingdoms. They just got destabilized by the internal destruction by way of slave trading, and then this person is saying, "Ew, they have martial law." Socialists don't want a military. They want to complain about being destroyed. Exactly. Like you're supposed to have martial law. Like even like I said, even America, one of the most like I said, it's probably probably the strongest European nation on the planet. Even America says, "Hey, look, we got to put martial law at some point." In fact, um, America is guilty. The American president said, "Hey, look, we actually have a military industrial complex," and what that means is that the military industry is very influential on a political level to the point where some people point out that America has only had 14 years of peacetime in its entire existence. In the last 300 freaking years or 250 years, 14 years. Uh, Anyway, so let's see. While the militarization of politics was going on in Yoruba land, changes were taking place in the structure of society, which brought about sharper class stratification. Numerous captives were taken in war, most of whom were sold to Europeans, so that Yoruba land. By the way, shout out to Real Black Gentleman. Real Black Gentleman's here. Shout out to Real Black Gentleman. Uh, so let's see. So changes were made as part of the structure, which brought about sharper class stratification. Numerous captives were taken in war, most of whom were sold to Europeans, so that Yoruba land became notorious as a slave-supplying region right up to the 1860s. Remember, 1860s is around the time that America is getting their emancipation. Like Africans in America are getting liberated, right? Or are engaging in engaging in the liberation wars. And again, like Jamaica was a little bit before that. Haiti was like 1801 or something. So a few years before that. People are. I got people laughing at me on my YouTube. Not on my WhatsApp. But anyway, many were prisoners. Actually, let me turn off my ringtone. Matter of fact, that's gonna be annoying. All right. But many were prisoners. War prisoners were retained locally in conditions approximating either to slavery or to serfdom, depending on whether or not they were first-generation captives. Sometimes refugees fleeing from destroyed towns also had no other option than to become clients or serfs of other free Yoruba. Such refugees were made to give service to their new overlords by farming the land in return for armed protection. However, serfs were also used as soldiers, which means that they had access to the means of production only through meeting an obligation in military labor. That is a measure of the extent to which the principle of kinship has been weakened, and it indicates that in contrast to the typical communal villages, states such as those in the 19th century, Yoruba land allocated roles and rewards to their citizens on the basis of reciprocal obligations characteristic of feudalism. Okay, dude. Yeah, again, we have to, like, the thing is that we're, like, this is the thing with the socialists. They're just like, oh, well, this is feudalism. Instead of just realizing these are human beings, possibly your ancestors, human beings in a very rough spot. You know, like I'll give you guys an example. When we talk about slavery, what comes to mind is the Restovac system, not just in Haiti, but throughout Africa. You could have a house girl or a house boy. You know, you can have a living servant or a visiting servant, and this is basically somebody who you don't pay that much money, but they still do a lot of work for you. Okay, um, they still not a lot of work, but they still work for you, right? So this will be somebody like a personal worker who you so on and so forth. And a lot of people will go to the villages where a lot of human beings are have limited opportunities, like limited opportunities for their own survival. So you go and you get them from the village and you help them survive on and so on and so forth. And this is just you. This is kind of okay, reciprocal obligation, so on and so forth. And then the socialist looks at this, which is a tough life for us as human beings, and says, "Oh, it's just feudalism, just the stage right before capitalism. That's it." Instead of, "Hey, look, life is hard, and we have to go out and make life easier and better for our people." But instead, it's just oh well, we're pre-capitalism. That's it, and we're post-capitalism. That's it. You know, it's just that simple. It's just that weird. It's just weird. I'll just say that. During the period under discussion, the division of labor among the Yoruba was extended with the rise of professional soldiers, or war boys as they were called. Professional soldiers who were sons of aristocrats left farming disdainfully to prisoners and serfs, the large number of whom ensured agricultural plenty. Other branches of economic activity also flourished, notably the making of cloth and palm oil and the trade in various products. These things were true in spite of the fact that by the time some labor was being lost both in the form of slaves exported and in the form of labor power devoted to capturing people for export, European visitors to Yoruba land in the middle of the 19th century could still admire the level of its material culture, along with the highly colorful and impressive aspects of its non-material culture, such as the annual yam festivals and the ritual of the religious cult of Shango, Ogoni, etc. One item of European technology that was anxiously sought, like again, I want you guys to realize Shango, Ogboni, so on and so forth. These are, you could say deities or Orisha that exist within the Western Hemisphere. So these people are being actively captured and kidnapped and brought to another part of the world and severed from their ancestry. Their children being worked like dogs. Somebody said that in Jamaica, the average lifespan of a Jamaican, right? So somebody who came off of somebody not a Jamaican, but of an African in Jamaica, the average lifespan for an African in Jamaica was 3 years. 3 years. So if you survive this grueling ship somehow, again, like 1/3 of the people survived it, right? If I'm not mistaken, it's like 1/3, maybe 2/3 survived, right? If you survive laying on your back for in chains, defecating on yourself, hair growing out, sweating underneath a ship. If you survive that travel for 3 months, right? Barely any showers, bugs crawling all over you, all that kind of stuff. You survived that. Then you were worked to death over the course of 3 freaking years. Or less. And like I said, some of those people survive. They put their culture in Jamaica, Haiti, America, so on and so forth. They put their Cuba, Brazil. They put their culture in those countries that they barely survived from, right? And then here we are 200 years later critiquing them because you had some feudalism. You had some. It's like, yeah, we're trying to survive as a genetic group. Like I was telling you guys, we're trying to survive as a genetic group, and it's not working. One item of European technology that was anxiously sought by Africans and that was fairly easily obtainable from Europeans was the firearm. From the 1920s onwards, the Yoruba acquired European firearms in large numbers and integrated them into a pattern of trade, politics, and military strategy. On the eve of colonial rule, Yoruba generals were reaching out for breech-loading rifles and even rockets, but Europeans stepped in too quickly for that move to get very far. Through a series of actions which started as early as 1860 in Lagos, and which included missionary infiltration as well as armed invasion, the British managed to bring that part of Africa under colonial rule. Economically, exactly, they were like, "Hey, can we get some rifles?" And it's like, "No, you can't get any rifles. What's wrong with it? You should have made them." But of course, I'm not saying that they could or that they would, but you should have. Um, like you can't ask another racial group, because remember, the British are another racial group looking out for their own survival. If you're looking, if they are looking for their survival and they're looking for their survival, let me tell you this: when this group has a survival interest that contrasts with this group's survival interest, this group won't help them. And sorry, I know some people are not looking at their phones. So what I'm saying is this: if the British have a survival interest that contrasts with the Yoruba survival interest, then the British will not help the Yoruba. It's that simple. And a lot of people, we talk about the Berlin Conference. We don't understand what the Berlin Conference was. A lot of us don't. What the Berlin Conference was not the Europeans go, blah, blah, blah. The Berlin Conference was the Europeans saying, look, okay, Britain, we won't interfere. We won't interfere in this area if you don't interfere in this area. Because what happened before was that the Yoruba could easily say, look, you're French, you're not British. We won't use our guns against the French. We'll just use it against the British. And so the Berlin Conference was the Europeans coming together and saying, look, these Africans are playing us against each other. Let's not make it anymore. Let's not do that anymore. That's it. It's not that, oh, well, they created these nations. No. They said they're looking to take you on one-on-one. That's what they said. They said they're looking to take you on one-on-one. Not that they created nations for you. They're looking to take you on one-on-one. And the thing is this, you weren't winning one-on-one because they were fighting 5 of you. You see what I'm saying? And the reason being is because they had better machinery. So like I said, in my next book, we're going to talk about technology. And particularly, we're going to talk about machinery. Anyway, so economic development is a matter of increasing capacity to produce, and it is tied up with patterns of land tenure and class relations. These basic facts were well brought out both positively and negatively in Yoruba history. So economic development is a matter of increasing capacity to produce, and it is tied up with patterns of land tenure and... Sorry, I gotta clean up my glasses. Economic development is a matter of increasing capacity to produce, and is tied up with a pattern of land tenure and class relations. So again, you see, the thing is this. I told you guys, economics really relates to parsimony. Buying money. And that's simple, and you get it. This right here, economic development is a matter of increasing capacity to produce. Come on. These basic facts were well brought out both positively and negatively in Yoruba history in the decades before independence was lost. So long as agricultural production was not disrupted, then for so long any given Yoruba state remained in a strong position. Ibadan was once the greatest military power in Yoruba land, selling captives as well as retaining many for use as laborers for its own benefit. But Ibadan's farming areas were hit by war, and Ibadan's rulers also started removing prisoners, farming the land, and selling them instead to Europeans. That became necessary because Ibadan needed firearms, and those could be obtained only by selling slaves. It was at that point that the undermining effect of the presence of European slave buyers on the coast became really paramount, right? By selling its own captives and serfs, Ibadan was undermining its own socio-economic base. If the prisoners were to develop into a true serf class, then those prisoners would have been guaranteed the right to remain fixed on the soil and protected from sale. That was one of the reasons why slavery as a mode of production in Europe had to give way to serfdom and feudalism, and under normal circumstances, Yoruba society did rapidly guarantee the removability of those captives who were integrated into the local production pattern. But forces unleashed by the European presence as slave buyers were too great to be withstood, and any hope of solving the problem disappeared with the loss of political power under colonialism. Too often, historians lay undue emphasis on the failure of 19th century Yoruba states to unite and produce an entity as large or as the former empire of Oyo. But firstly, the size of political unity is not the most important criterion for evaluating the achievements of its people. And secondly, a given people can disintegrate politically and later integrate even more efficiently. The Yoruba state of Ibadan, Abeokuta, Ijie had populations of up to 100,000 citizens, as large as most of the city-states, principalities, and palatines of feudal Germany. That is a comparison which is worth bringing to light, and is one that struck European observers who happened to visit Yoruba land in the middle years of the 19th century. Germany had long had the common culture and language, and there was a form of political unity under the Holy Roman Empire from the 12th to the 15th century. However, after the Reformation and the breakup of the Holy Roman Empire, the German people were divided into as many separate political entities as there are days in the year, some of them being hardly bigger than a public park. Yet, the internal class relations and productive forces continued to develop throughout Germany, and ultimately by 1870, unity was again achieved, with feudalism giving way to a powerful capitalist nation state. Similarly, the Yoruba were a widely spread cultural entity with a single language. After the fall of the Oyo Empire, the development processes were slowly drawn down by both internal and external factors, but they were not stopped. It took the arrival of European colonialism to do that. Within the sphere of West and Central African slaving, state building continued with varying degrees of success. For instance, the Akan state grew up in a manner as impressive as that of the Oyo Empire. Fortunately for the Akan, slave exports reached alarming proportions only during the first half of the 18th century. And again, that's 1720s and stuff. By that time, a state such as Asante had sunk roots deep enough to withstand the adverse effects of slaving. It continued to be incorporated with the heartland of the Western Sudan, and by the 1870s, when the British tried to dictate to Asante, these famous African people did not give up without heroic armed struggle. Asante's connection with the export of slaves in the 18th century led its rulers to concentrate on expansionism of the type which would bring in captives through war, raid, tribute, and as articles of trade from regions where they had been made prisoner. Besides, since the 15th century, a Khan country was building up rather than exporting its human resources. Captives were incorporated locally into the society, and on the eve of colonialism, a substantial proportion of Asante society was made up of Odonkoba, the descendants of one-time captives who were the laboring population of the land. Development had come not through exporting and losing labor, but by increasing and maximizing it. So he started talking about the Akan, he was talking about Yoruba, but other than that, pretty interesting. But again, you gotta understand that 15th century and 18th century, that's 300 years. Like, it's a long time to be that these Europeans were in Africa, you know, uh, a long time. So again, Dahomey. Now, of course, this is not saying that the Europeans were in Africa, but they were in Africa. But this is not saying that they were with the Akan country. I'm just saying that generally the Europeans were in Africa for a long time. So anyway, Dahomey. So Dahomey, I tend to think Dahomey is a new nation, like created as a result of the European slave trade. But we'll see what Walter Rodney says. So he says Asante's eastern neighbors beyond the Volta River were Dahomey. Since Dahomey was more deeply involved in the European slave trade and for a much longer period, the experience shall be cited at a greater length. Throughout the 18th and 19th century, Dahomey had a stagnant, if not declining, population and an economy that had virtually no props other than slave exports. What Dahomey succeeded in doing, in spite of all this, that is a tribute to the achievements of man inside the African continent. It should be made clear that the groundwork for the socio-political development of the Aja Fan people of Dahomey was laid down in the periods preceding the influence of Europe on West Africa. By the 15th century, the Aja of Alada and Waida were already in existence, having a loose connection with the Yoruba of Ife. Dahomey was an offshoot from Alada in the 16th century, and by the early 18th century it expanded to incorporate both Alada and Waida. The kings of Alada and Waida had made the mistake of either failing to protect their own citizens from enslavement or of actually conniving at their enslavement. Dahomey never followed such a policy, which was directly antagonistic to the very maintenance of the state. Instead, Dahomey eventually became the classic raiding state of West Africa, after failing to get Europeans to accept any products other than human beings. To achieve that, Dahomey had first to build up a tightly organized military state, whose monarch came much closer to an authoritarian or despot than the Alafin of Oyo or the Asantehene of Asante. Secondly, Dahomey invested a great deal of time and ingenuity on its army so as to protect its own citizens and wage war abroad. Now again, you have this martial law, because um, you know you're faced with an invasion. You know, like you like again, like I said, in Ukraine right now, you have people who are like, hey, why are we fighting the Russians? And they're being bullied and beaten and battered by and humiliated by the Ukrainian soldiers or the Ukrainian government. You know, so like if you're like not for the war, you don't want to be drafted, or like they're forcefully drafting people and sending them pretty much to their death on the front lines, right? But in Ukraine, what happens is that yeah, you have videos circulating where people are tied up against trees with their pants down, and you know clear scarring, or you know bruising from being whipped or beaten or pummeled for just not being for the war, you know. But like you're gonna have martial law, so it's like yeah, the invasion of Ukraine by Russia is not like the technology difference is not really comparable to the technology difference that Africans faced. It's not It's not comparable. Um, yeah. So anyway, within European history, the state of Sparta stood out as one that was completely dedicated to the art of war. Europeans in Africa in the 18th century and 19th century invariably referred to Dahomey as a black Sparta. Throughout the 18th century, the cavalry of Oyo was more than a match for Dahomey's foot soldiers, and Dahomey remained a tribute-paying portion of the Oyo Empire. But with the fall of Oyo, Dahomey became the supreme military state in that region, and indeed wreaked vengeance on its former Yoruba overlords. Warfare was necessary for securing slaves outside of Dahomey and for obtaining firearms. It was in fact essential for survival. And again, at least he recognizes survival as the goal here. Because again, if you didn't form a military state, like you were just being sent to your death to America. You know what I mean? Like you were just being sent to your death. And the thing is that these same people who were fighting were being sent to their death. So we see, oh, Dahomey is fighting the Yoruba. So now the Yoruba are going to be enslaved. And we see, oh, the Yoruba are fighting the Dahomey. So the Dahomey are going to be enslaved. You see? Like, I think it's Dessalines, one of his mentors was this woman, I can't remember her name, but she was from Dahomey. Dahomey is profound, and you know she brought that military knowledge. Some people allege that she brought that military knowledge to um, Dessalines. Dessalines. All right, so Dahomey's profound preoccupation with militaristic activities can be illustrated in many ways. The value system rewarded the brave and the victorious, while ruthlessly despising and even liquidating the cowardly and the unsuccessful on the battlefield. So again, you think of Shaka Zulu. The two chief ministers of the king were the commanders of the left and the right armies, and other military officers held political appointments. Then, too, the artistic media constantly harped upon the theme of war. Beautiful mosaics and paintings appeared on the walls of the palace of Dahomey, all dealing with military victories. Historical accounts, as rendered by professional reciters, reflected the same bias, and the cloth worker busied themselves making emblems, colors, and umbrellas for the generals and the regiments. Two unique innovations set Dahomey off from its African neighbors, and even give its special claim within the context of feudal or semi-feudal military organizations. Firstly, Dahomey encouraged young boys to become apprentices of war. By the age of 11 or 12, a boy would be attached to a veteran soldier, helping to carry his supplies and observing battle. The second innovation, and the one that was more widely commented upon, was Dahomey's utilization of its female population within the army. Apparently, the wives in the royal palace started off as ceremonial guards in the 18th century, and then progressed to become an integral part of Dahomey's fighting machine, on terms of complete equality of hardship and reward. Dahomey's population in the 19th century was probably no more than 200,000, and the state consistently managed to send 12,000 to 15,000 actives on its annual campaigns. Of those, it was estimated in 1845 that some 5,000 were women, the so-called Amazons of Dahomey, who were feared in their ferocity in battle. So, again, 5,000 of 15,000 is one third. Or even 5,000 of 12,000 is almost a half, which is pretty like a lot of women. 200,000 people. And again, you have to remember that when you're talking about these old kingdoms, you're talking about like not that much people, but given the time period, it's a significant state. Um, in the long run, the trade in slaves cast a blight on Dahomey. Slaving campaigns were costly and not always rewarding in terms of captains. European buyers failed to turn up during certain years, depending on European conditions. For example, during the American independence, the French Revolution, and the subsequent Revolutionary Wars, there was a lull in Dahomeyan slave exports because far fewer European ships could be spared for the trade in slaves. Without selling captives to get firearms to carry on more warfare for slaves, Dahomey felt its glory and military honor was slipping. Resort to human sacrifice was one attempt to compensate for the diminishing reputation of the state and its monarch, as was the case with the Oba of Benin in the 19th century. Even so, the story of the reputed savagery of Dahomey was exaggerated incredibly. The Dahomeyan state created such refinements as a population census, it conducted diplomacy far and wide with all the niceties and the protocols that one usually hears of only in connection with civilized European states, and it built up a system of espionage and intelligence as an essential ingredient in its own security. Above all, attention should be focused at least briefly on the role of the artist in Dahomeyan society. Much like what is he talking about? Much I mean I don't mind that. It's just like what are you talking about? Much of African art springs from elaboration of things functional, such as pottery and cloth. However, both religion and the state power also stimulated art. For instance, the brasses and bronzes of Ife were executed on behalf of the religious cults and were associated with the Oni of Ife. What? The Oni of Ife and the royal family. So that's pretty cool. Who's that? All right. Indeed, it is a most widespread phenomenon that the feudal ruling class gave its protection to artists along with sustenance and recognition. This was true in Mandarin China. With this guy's all over the place. Let me go hold you. With pottery makers and theater artists, it was true of 16th century Italy of the Renaissance, and it was true of Dahomey for the 17th and the 19th century. No one knows which Dahomeyan is to be credited with any given artistic achievement of the independent pre-colonial period. However, in that time, particular individuals were given the opportunity for self-discovery and self-development and of serving the society as a whole. Their task was to give pleasure and to capture the hopes and ambitions of the people in palace wall paintings, in wrought iron sculptures, in the stamped patterns of hand-woven cloth designed for royalty, or on the intricately carved heads of the safe conduct staffs of the king's ambassador, and the lively tales of how the founders of the Dahomeyan kingdom came out of the belly of a leopard. It was art that centered around royalty and noble families, but it was also a national product and a point of identification for the people as a whole. Subsequently, such artistic skills either disappeared or became debased to serve the curiosity of Philistine colonialists. It is still held in some quarters that Dahomey's development in certain spheres must be credited to slave trading. To demonstrate conclusively that African power and military development through the 19th century was an extension of groundwork already laid in an earlier epoch, it is best to turn to zones where foreign influence was non-existent. The interlacustrine zone of East Africa is one such. So now we're going to talk a little bit about Tanzania, too. So the Eastern interlacustrine states. In an earlier discussion, attention was directed to Bonyuro Kitara as the most advanced sociopolitical formation in East Africa up to the 15th century. Its ruling dynasty, the Bachwezi, declined for reasons that are not clear, and they were overwhelmed by new immigrants from the north. While there is some doubt as to whether the Bachwezi had an Ethiopian origin, it is clearly established that the 16th century immigrants were Luo people from a section of the Nile that flows through the Sudan. Following upon Luo migration, a new line known as the Babito dynasty was placed in power over Bunyoro proper. Other branches of the same dynasty were enthroned in several places, sometimes breaking off from the main line. As late as the 19th century, a separate Babito kingdom was carved out in Toro. Meanwhile, in Bachwezi or Bahima had staged a comeback in regions to the south in the form of clan known as the Bahinda. The Bahinda were one of the pastoralist clans of the old Banyuro Kitara state, and in the period from the 16th century onwards, their stronghold was in Ankole and Karagwe. Obviously, the new Babito ruling class immediately sought to take control of the land, but in accordance with settled African customs. The latter tried to project themselves as the original owners of the land rather than usurpers. In Busoga, where there were several small Babito kings, a researcher reported the following dialogue about land between a member of the royal clan and a commoner. Royal clan members, we found this place empty and made something of it. You fellows later came round begging for land, so we were generous and gave you some. Naturally, you're now our slaves. Oh, commoner, oh, what a lie. We were here long before you. You took your power by trickery. You princes have always been scoundrels. What is this? I think I kind of missed this. I started thinking about my you know, me getting money. Well, me buying money. But anyway, let me see. What are they saying? Let's see. Obviously, the new Babito ruling class immediately sought to take control of the land, but in accordance with settled African customs, they later tried to project themselves as the original owners of the land rather than usurpers. In Busongo, there were several small Babito kings. Researchers reported the following dialogue about land between a member of the royal family and a commoner. Okay, so they're saying that um, there was some foreigners came and took over the land, and they're like, oh, the guys are scoundrels. All right. At no stage in the independent history of the intercostrian state did land become purely a personal possession to be monopolized by a given class, as in the classic European feudal model. Scholars frequently demand this feature before they concede that feudalism has arrived, but they fail to take into account the reality of the distribution and usufruct or usufruct usufruct or produce of the land being in the hands of a few. And they failed to realize that where cattle were dominant form of wealth, that private ownership of herds was also part of a process by which producers were separated from the means of production. To be specific, those who owned the herds were usually the Bahinda or other Bahima or the new Babito families, while those who tended them were clients and virtually serfs of the owner. As far as land was concerned, the peasants who farmed it paid a heavy tax and crops to the clan heads and ruling authorities to allow the latter to live without resort to agricultural work. It is necessary to recall that in the process of independent evolution on all continents, the increase in produce capacity was accompanied by increasing inequality at all stages except socialism. So it is necessary to recall that in the process of independent evolution on all continents, the increase in productive capacity was accompanied by increasing inequality at all stages except socialism. So again, he's saying, look, increasing capacity leads to increasing equality, except in this imaginary economy. Except in socialism. Anyway. The state of the interlacustrine zone continued developing uninterruptedly. And again, the increasing capacity is linked to how, like essentially, in order to get increasing productive capacity, you need to spend your savings on, like you need to buy money, buy machines. You need machines. You need better machinery. You need better technology. You know, you need iron tools instead of bronze tools instead of using your hand. And when you're beyond iron tools, you need the cow that pulls the hoe, I guess, and then maybe not the cow that pulls the whatever. And then you beyond the cow, you need like mechanic, like you need to convert energy into mechanical motion to simulate a cow. You know, and then you have the tractor and all that kind of stuff, right? You have that. But in order to get this, that's costly. And not everybody's going to have it. Now, you could technically give everybody it through socialism and like make them not have to buy it, sure. But then the next big thing comes. And then you could technically give that away too. But then the next big thing comes. And you can technically give that away too. But can you afford to start giving away everything? No, at some point you can't. You know, and then you're still going to have that inequality. So you don't really solve inequality in this imaginary system where you just give away everything. Or you stunt growth when you just give away everything. Instead of saying, hey, you know what? You have a tractor, and now because you have a tractor, instead of giving other people tractors, what about you get, you use your tractor to get another tractor, and another tractor, and another tractor. And now all of a sudden, you are a productive individual. So the interlacustrine zone continued developing uninterruptedly up to the eve of colonialism to highlight the expanded productive capacity of the state, and at the same time to recognize frankly that it was a result of increased exploitation, not only of natural resources, and of course exploitation, but also of the labor of the majority. The latter was disenfranchised and oppressed to get them to the toil in the interest of a few who lived in palaces. Now again, this is the tongue of the socialists. They look for everything as exploitation. You know, it's like for instance, my son. In fact, he starts nowadays. He just brings me a cup of water in the morning. Okay, he just brings me a cup of water in the morning. I don't even like right now. I'm thirsty, but because my son's not here, I'm like, what am I supposed to do about that, right? But like usually, he'll just bring me a cup of water. To the socialist, that's exploitation. Meanwhile, this guy lives rent free in my house. You see what I'm saying? the leadership of a country, they are doing other things. You know, not living in palaces. They're doing things in these palaces. Now, sure, some people are going to live luxuriously in the palaces, and some people are going to be investing in machinery. But it's the same with the freaking peasants. Some of them are barely producing what they need or any surplus, and some people are producing a good surplus. You know? It's the same regardless. But if you're living it like you're not, oh, well, they're living in the palace. No, they are selling things across the planet. They are making diplomatic relations across the planet. They are settling disputes among the locals. And that's the thing the socialist doesn't understand. It's like sometimes another part of work is marketing. You know, like I said, one of the things that you have to do is you buy things, right? But you buy things from a market. Okay, the luxuries are on the market, so on and so forth. Another thing you have to realize is that you have to do marketing. Marketing is its own quote unquote labor. You know, so somebody wrote a post on Twitter. They were talking about how these guys, like basically, so basically, OnlyFans is this website where women can sell images of themselves, right? And women will do this, and the whole purpose of OnlyFans, in a sense, was that women now can own their own image and they can negotiate and sell on their own behalf, right? So in come some men or women who say, hey, look, we can help you get to a bigger, wider market, right? And we will take, well, in the example put out, they said we'll take 50% of your revenue. Okay? Now the women, if you're tripling their sales, right? Them taking triple their sales at 50% of the revenue is them increasing their revenue by 1.5. Okay? So if a woman is used to, let's just pick some random number. All right, so if a woman's used to taking in $1,000 a month or whatever, right? Now she's making $1,500 a month because somebody else is managing their marketing, right? So, but here's the thing. People listen to this and they say, well, the men are exploiting the women. Instead of saying, hey, look, they're both engaging in a mutually beneficial arrangement. You see? Because now the woman is earning more and the man is earning something off of his marketing skills. They're saying, no. She's doing the labor. And she's not even doing labor. She's just taking pictures. The man is allegedly he does AI to simulate chat with her fans. He goes on Twitter, he goes on Instagram, he goes on TikTok, and he produces content. You know, he makes these videos. He's doing his own fair share of work and bringing her more money. And obviously you might say, well, 50% is a lot. Yeah, it's a lot. Or 30% is a lot. Yeah, it's a lot. But he's not working for free. Or she'd be exploiting him. Or according to you guys, actually. But the point is that she engages to some sort of arrangement where she and them, and instead of saying, hey, you know what? Like, instead of saying, oh, well, he's living in the palace while she's living also in a palace, just taking pictures of her feet, right? You're like, oh, he's living in the palace, the exploitation. That's the problem with the socialists. They're not understanding markets. They're not understanding, hey, look, this lady's buying money. Money comes at a cost. That's what buying money means. Money comes at a cost. And if you're not willing to pay that cost, you're going to be fucking poor. Necessities come at a cost. Money comes at a cost. Luxuries come at a cost. And you just have to do your cost analysis and be cost efficient. And yeah, I'm going to write that in my next book. Hopefully you guys are interested in it. I know you guys are interested. I mean, look, I thought my last book was going to sell out, and it didn't. So, you know, that's why I got to say that. I know it's interesting. I just don't know if it's interesting enough. You know what I'm saying? All right, so the inter-lacustrine kingdoms fell mainly in what is now Uganda, Rwanda, and Burundi, right? Oh, these are... No, you said Botswana. Only in the northeast of Tanzania are the representatives of the inter-lacustrine complex of states. Northeast Tanzania was the most developed portion of the country in the pre-colonial epoch. I actually never went to northeast Tanzania. I should go. Because the rest of mainland Tanzania comprised numerous small kingdoms that had not decisively left behind the communal stage. But northeast Tanzania was also the corner of the country in which problems arose when a new ideology of egalitarianism was being preached after the end of the colonial era, because there was already a regime of inequality in the distribution of land and produce and in the rights granted to individuals. In fact, in any meaningful political sense, the area was feudal. There is some disagreements as to the origins of the important intercolonial state of Buganda. Some traditions give it the same Luo origin as Bunyoro, while others tend to hold that it was Bachwezi survival. Its social structure certainly paralleled that of Babito Bunyoro closely. Unlike in Ankole, in Buganda, the Bahima did not have the reins of political power. They were only associated with the cattle-owning ruling class, very often in the junior capacity of herdsmen. In any event, Buganda's history is one of gradual expansion and consolidation at the expense of Bunyoro and other neighbors. By the 18th century, it had become the dominant power in the whole region. The Buganda state had a sound agricultural base, with bananas as a staple and with cattle products being available. The craftsmen manufactured bark cloth for export, and local production of iron and pots were supplemented by imports from neighboring African communities. Their lack of salt was a big stimulus to the extending of their trade network to obtain the necessary supplies, and as was true of the Western Sudan, such an extension of networks of commerce was in effect integrating the productive resources of a large area. Carl Peter and what's interesting is noting their lack of salt. You know, because like I said, I was in Tanzania and the food was so bland. But they did have salt, obviously, but the food was really bland. And you know, the thing we don't really factor in is that seasoning, like living in the West, seasoning is easy to get like that. But that's because we're in this like the center of empires, right? But if you're not living in the center of an empire, you can't just snap your feet. Like you know, center of empires with large markets. But if you're not living in the center of empires with large markets, you know, a lot of things that we tend to take for granted may not be there. You know, and obviously, if you want it in your market, you have to go out and get it. So this is what they were saying. Their lack of salt was a big stimulus to the extending of their trade network to obtain the necessary supplies. And it was true of the Western Sudan. Such an extension of the network of commerce was in effect integrating the productive resources of a large area. Carl Peters, the advanced agent of German colonialism in East Africa, remarked that in estimating the political and commercial affairs of East Africa, too little stress is laid in internal trade among the tribes. The barter trade of Buganda defies all direct calculation. In Buganda's case, the absence of slave trading must have been important in expanding internal production and trade, and therefore providing a sound base for the political superstructure. The kings of Buganda set up a small permanent armed force, which served as bodyguard, and the rest of the national army was raised when necessary. The political administration was centralized under the Kobaka, and direct rulers were appointed by the Kobaka and his council, rather than left to be provided by the clans on a hereditary family basis. Greater ingenuity went into devising plans for administering this large kingdom through a network of local officials. Perhaps the best tribute to the political sophistication of Buganda came from the British when they found Buganda and other East African feudalities in the 19th century. They were the best tributes because they were reluctantly extracted from white racists and culturally arrogant colonialists did not want to admit that Africans were capable of anything. Actually, Europeans were so impressed with what they saw in the interlocution zone that they invented the thesis that these political states could not possibly have been the work of Africans and must have been built at an earlier date by white Hamites from Ethiopia. This myth seemed to get some support from the fact that the Bachwezi were said to have been light-skinned. However, in the first place, had the Bachwezi come from Ethiopia, they would have been black or brown Africans. And secondly, as noted earlier, the cultures of East Africa were synthesis of local developments plus African contributions from outside of the specific localities. They were certainly not foreign imports. Assuming that the Bachwezi or Bahima were from Ethiopia. And bear in mind, what is known as light skin in Africa is not what we consider. So, like, if you're yellow, like, if you're light skin, like yellow, then they call you white in Africa. You know? If you are like my complexion, they call you brown. And if you are like darker than me, then they call you black. You know, and even if you're like even if you're like a lighter brown, right? They call you white. You know what I mean? So like technically like in Africa, like I'm nearly white or something like that, you know? Or maybe not me per se, but you get what I'm saying. Like the complexion of like they will call a person with light brown skin white. So what is meant by light skinned here um, may just be like a normal ass complexion. Like essentially, and here's the thing. So basically, you could be really dark if you're on the equator. So one of the things, in fact, I should probably pull up my map. I probably won't show you guys the map, but you guys know what I'm talking about. Uh, so they say Uganda, right? So Uganda, if we look at the map, and maybe I'll pull it out for you guys. I don't know, but let's see. Where is Uganda? Okay, there's Uganda. Um, okay, so I'm gonna actually I'll show this. I'll show the screen. Hold on a second. So we're going to show this screen. Let me hold on a second. It looks like shaking my damn head. So it looks like I was about to show you guys the places like I was about to show you my Google Maps screen, but Google Maps like pretty much shows off all of your like all of your hold on a second. Let's just make sure. Yeah, Google Maps pretty much shows off all the places you've searched before, like locations, and so it's just it's TMI, you know. Um, anyway, let's see if I can find. I'm gonna show this window. Where is it? So it's not Google Chrome. Oh, here. So this is Africa, right? Okay, so when you zoom out, you see this is where the equator is. So actually, they say some of humanity originated in Kenya. Okay, so you zoom out, that's the equator. So people along the equator will usually be pretty dark. Um, Although even people in India are pretty dark, but this is like where like dark skin is, right? And then so in Africa, you could have black skin. You get what I'm saying? And then, but like if you're from any of these regions, like here or here, you could have brown skin. And so somebody, and of course you could have, like I said, you could be in India over here and have black skin too. You know, so it's not like it's only limited to that. But my point is that, yeah, so this is where Uganda is. So you see, this is Uganda. This is Uganda. This is Kenya, the birthplace of humanity, some people say. This is Tanzania. It's pretty big, which is another good thing about it. DRC is huge. I didn't even notice, but yeah. DRC is huge. South Africa is pretty big too. Botswana is pretty big. These are all pretty big countries. A lot of people complain about how African countries are small, but I think they mostly mean like these countries over here. Um, but anyway, so what I'm saying is this though. And by the way, Tanzania also includes Zanzibar. But look at that Zanzibar right there. So Zanzibar. So I mean, it's not. I guess it's not that impressive when you look at how big Tanzania is, for it to combine with thing. But regardless, what I'm saying is this: you have this equator. So what lighter skinned means while you're on the equator is probably like because like I said, Ethiopia would be like kind of like what he was saying about thing, but about Ethiopia, like, oh, they would still be black and brown, right? Um, it's like that's what they're like when we get out of the European mindset, the Eurocentric mindset, we begin to realize that when somebody from here is saying, "Oh yeah, you're lighter skinned," right? They're talking about my complexion. Like even if they're saying like for instance, South Sudan is some of the darkest people here in Juba, right? Um, like yeah, they will call me light skinned, right? And again, depending on how dark you are, you might even call somebody like me white. Am I white like the people in Europe? Now this is where Europe is. Europe is over here. So again, this is the equator. This is Europe. They are light. Okay, they are white. But again, if your whole life is in Uganda, and I think I probably could show you guys. Let me just not freely Google, but I can show you guys what the Sudanese look like, and then you can see what I'm talking about. So let's do that. Sudanese. Let's just do Sudanese people because there are some images that I Um, this is one image that I really wanted to show you guys. Actually, these are pretty good images, but this is not the images that I wanted to show. But yeah, all right, I'll show you guys. So these are not the images I wanted to show, but it is what it is. Let's just look at these. So these are the complexions of people in South Sudan. You see what I'm saying? So this is South Sudan. This is what the kids look like. So these people, if you're my skin color, right? Like this woman, if you're my skin color, yeah, you're gonna say I'm lighter skinned. Now, does that mean I'm not black? No, but again, now South Sudan is not on the equator, but this is like the population, um, that would like this is like one of those populations where, melanin, so they're black, right? Um, and then you have like the other populations of Africa, like so. Then this would be, for them, this would be brown, and this would be light skin. You see what I'm saying? Now, is this a white person? No. This is European? Absolutely not. But is this lighter than this? Yes. Okay. And because of that, and what's interesting too is that allegedly this was the complexion of a lot of African Americans at once upon a time. Allegedly, according to African Americans at the time, like an African American in 1900, maybe not this complexion, as much as I personally like this complexion, but what I'm saying is that in like there's an account, and I put it in the Book of Power, but there's an account from an African woman in America who says that, yeah, the complexion of Americans are becoming lighter and lighter, and once upon a time they would be, jet black. Like the African Americans would be jet black, and now they're not. Now maybe they're not. I don't know, but again, this is like the equatorial complexion, and so this other complexion is just yeah, um, that's what's considered lighter skinned but if you're in the European mindset, you're thinking lighter skin means something else, but it really isn't. That's something else. And so, like I said, even in Africa, so in Africa, these people are considered black. These people are considered brown, and then like something lighter than this would be considered white, but not white. You know what I mean? So like, let me see. Well, this is obviously white, but this will obviously be considered white. But again, it's not white like European. It's just lighter. Of course, I'm looking at, so like these people might be considered white. Maybe not, but like maybe possibly too. Which is confusing to us in America. But okay, like this woman would be considered white in Africa, right? Now she wouldn't be considered white anywhere else, really, but in Africa she'd be considered white, and that's something that we don't get while we're in while we're in America, you know, because there was this one guy who's walking around Africa like, oh, am I black or white? And people would look at him, and so to us, I mean, obviously he looked like he was mixed to me, but to us, we understand what he's saying, right? We understand that if this woman walks around and says, am I black or white? You're like, yeah, you're a black woman, right? But in Africa, it's like asking, am I her, this lady, or the other lady? Am I black or am I white? And so that lady asking if she's white, it's like, yeah, obviously you're white, but we don't get it because we're locked into the American centered view as opposed to the African centered view. And that's all I wanted to say about that. That's a little bit of a tangent, really. Okay, we have people here. Socialist says, Bit of Medicine says, this sounds odd to say the least. No Jamaican testers from Kingston. White, bro. We are black. KISS. Yeah, keep it simple. Buana says blue black. Buana says hello, boss lady. Cassandra says hi. Hey, what's up, Cassandra? I wonder why. Yeah, again, I would say I get that what we're saying, because like we tend to say white means European, right? But they're using white as light skinned and black as dark skinned. You get what I'm saying? And that's because there only is black, like African people there. You get what I'm saying? As opposed to like we live in a multiracial society. So like I'll say in another way, once upon a time in Europe, before they had these, like a lot of like before they were like multiracial heavy, they used to call each other red or pink or those kind of things. Like they would differentiate within their own race, or like pale, for instance. Like some people be white, some people be red, some people be so on and so forth. They would differentiate among their own because of the color gradient among their own group. You know? And I think the same with the Chinese. Like the same with most people. Like if you have a particular color range, right? And you're not talking from a multiracial standpoint, then you would differentiate between these other kind of groups. I think I could actually pull that up maybe. I don't know. But I think they would do it. But like afterward, yeah, like if you were to say like they all knew they were African though. But who was dark skinned versus who was light skinned is a different story. And I know Buana said that no Jamaican teller from Kingston, white bro. Yeah, they in Jamaica they also had that color differentiation though. So my grandmother would tell me, oh yeah, some people are yellow, some people are brown, and some people are black. In Jamaica. So Bitter Medicine says that should have changed once they encountered the other people. But that's what I'm trying to say. In Jamaica, they have the same color differentiation. They have the same color differentiation. Or they did during my grandmother's era. Like they would have the same color differentiation. And the Jamaicans obviously had contact with other people. The thing about the Buganda and the people that we're talking about right now is that they didn't have, like the whole point about looking into them is that they did not have interaction with other people. So what we see is that they're saying within their own undisturbed variety, oh yeah, those other people are lighter skinned. And the thing is that, yeah, if you could be indigenous African and lighter skinned. Like South African people are notably lighter skinned because they're so far from the equator. But also, now of course, some people suspect racial admixture, but other people, recognize that there is the Sand people, who are considered some of the more genetically diverse people on the planet, are oftentimes like you could find some light, like some yellow complexion among them, and so in Africa they'd be considered white, but obviously they're indigenous African people. Anyway, so like, however, in the first place, Bachesi came from Ethiopia. They would have been black or brown Africans. Yeah. So, and secondly, as noted, so again, brown is lighter than black. And secondly, as noted earlier, the cultures of East Africa were citizens, so on and so forth. So assuming, and I just wanted to give on that tangent because I think it's important for us to realize, like, what is meant by, oh, they were lighter skinned. They were light skinned. Because again, the Sand people are light skinned. Are they foreigners? No. Are they light skinned? I don't know if you guys, everybody knows about the Sand people though. So I don't know if I have to show you guys that, but I'll look it up anyway. They're considered possibly the ancestors of European, obviously. What was it? The Sandsmen. Yeah. But they're like super indigenous people. They're considered the ancestors of the group that may have been the ones that left Africa. Are their variant. But yeah, this is the Sand people. And you see them, they're light skinned. So this would be yellow. This would be like in Jamaica. This would be yellow. In Africa, this would be white. A lot of these people. Now, obviously, this is not all of their complexion. Some of them have dark skin. But the whole point of this is to say that, yeah, if like this is a different complexion from the people that we just saw. This is a different complexion, but it's an indigenous complexion. And it's like, if you're looking at it from a local perspective, is this black compared to the people with darker complexion? No. If you say that all of them are black to juxtapose against white people, then that just might be us saying, hey, look, white people, are central to our own perspective. But why should the San people who are not engaging with Europeans, why should they develop a language system based around Europeans? That's the big question. You know, a lot of people don't develop language systems based around Europeans, um, per se. Damn, now these look like they mixed. I ain't gonna hold you. These look like they mixed. I don't know. But anyway, we're gonna go back to the book. How do I do that? Let's see. Go to PDF. All right. So, and I'm so thirsty, man. When my son's coming home? Uh, so let's see. This should have changed once the Native Americans knew those were pale face. Yeah, Native Americans eventually. Buana says, bitter meds, you good? The fam good? And he says, I'm good personally. I have someone in hospice. Oh, damn. Um, sorry about that. Sorry about that, bitter med. He said the Native Americans. Yeah, the Native Americans eventually caught on. But see, the thing is that I know, like the Africans caught on too. It's just a matter of like obviously like people knew the difference between the Europeans and the Africans, but you can't ignore that some people are more deeply melanated than others, or some people are less melanated than others, and like the shorthand language for that is, as you know, to just name their color. You know what I mean? Uh, so like yeah, are you black or are you brown? You know, and it's like the same grouping. It's just that in America the language means something else. Like in American English it means something else, but it doesn't actually mean something in Africa. Like it doesn't mean the same thing in Africa. Like essentially what happens in America is the color is your race. You know? So, and the thing is this too, that even in America, that wasn't until recently. You know? So even in America, you had blue vein societies, you had National Association of Colored People, colored versus black or colored versus Negro. So even in America, you had, or even before, you had Negro for the racial group and black for so on and so forth. It's just very recently that Americans started saying, oh, black is the racial group. You know what I mean? When like it wasn't the racial group before. And so it's like even saying the it should have changed with the thing. It's not true. It's like it didn't happen. Even for America, because in America we were called Negroes up until I want to say the 19 somethings, right? Like I want to say like up until 1970 or something, you know, possibly 1980, 1990. Like we were called Negroes and we weren't even called blacks, you know. Like it was really up until very recently that we started saying black and Negro was interchangeable, you know, because even Garvey was like, he's gonna say Negro instead of colored. All right, so Chubing the Bachwezi or Bahima were from Ethiopia. Then they lost their language and became Bantus, speaking like their subjects. Were from Ethiopia, then they lost. Assuming that the Bachwezi or Bahima were from Ethiopia, they lost it. They became Bantu speaking, right? The same thing happened to the Babito dynasty of Luo extraction, indicating that they had been absorbed by the local culture. Furthermore, the Babito and the Bahima, Bahinda also forged close connections from the 16th to the 19th century. In effect, out of different ethnic groups, castes, and classes, a number of nationalities were emerging. The nationality group is held to be that social formation which immediately precedes the nation state. And in effect, out of different ethnic groups, castes, and classes, a number of nationalities were emerging. The nationality grouping is social formation which immediately precedes the nation state, and the definition applies to the peoples of Buganda, Banyoro, Ankole, Karagwe, and Toro, as well as those of Rwanda and Burundi. So now we're going to talk about Rwanda. The westernmost portion of the Interlacustrine zone comprised the kingdom of Rwanda and Burundi. So you see that it was actually possibly coastal because Rwanda is a little inland, and Burundi. The two countries which today bear, and Rwanda is tiny. The two countries which today bear their names are centered around the old kingdoms. The experience of Rwanda will be instanced here. Like the old Banyuro Kitara kingdom and like its northeastern neighboring state in Ankole, Rwanda was split into two major social groups. So hopefully they're not talking about the Tutsi and the Hutu. Oh, they are. Okay. Though the great majority of the population were cultivators known as Bahutu, political power was in the hands of Batutsi, pastoralists comprising about 10% of the population. An even smaller minority were the Batwa, about 1%, who had a very low level of pre-agricultural social organization. So Bwa means people, Ba means people. So the Hutu people, the Tutsi people, and the Twa people. The Twa, if you guys don't know, are they're probably gonna say the like some people call them the pygmies. See, and so the Tutsi were tall, the Hutu were short, and the pygmies were even shorter. And the Twa were even shorter. Um, let's see the comments. Bonna says, "Okay, understood." All right, so the relative physiques of the three social segments in Rwanda offers a interesting commentary on the development of human beings as a species. The Batutsi are one of the tallest human groups in the world. The Bahutu are short and stocky, and the Batwa are pygmies. The difference can be explained largely in terms of social occupation and diet. The Batwa were not living in settled agricultural communities. Instead, they wandered around in small bands, hunting and digging roots, thereby failing to assure themselves of plentiful or rich food. At the other extreme, so again, these are the Twa. The Twa are considered some of the most ancient. Like essentially, they have the Negroes and the Negritos. They're considered some of the most ancient groups of Homo sapiens, in a sense, um, and possibly the inventors of civilization, right, as we know it. But today they're, just hunters. Um, and then you have other people, right? So at the other extreme, the Batutsi, pastoralists. So these are pastoralists, are people who have, the cows and so forth. Were subsisting on the constantly accessible and rich diet of milk and meat. The Bahutu were more socially advanced than the Batwa. They ate more and more regularly than the latter because Bahutu agriculture meant that they did not live entirely on the whims of nature, following scarce game like the Batwa. However, the quality of their food fell short of the protein-rich Batutsi diet. Thus, the development of man, the physical being, is also linked in the broader sense of the expansion of productive capacity and the distribution of food. So this is pretty interesting that he concludes this way. So what's important about this is this. These are three different economic groups. Okay? You have the nomadic pastoralists, okay? You have the agriculturalists, and you have the hunter. They're going to be in conflict. The hunter is going to be wiped out by the agriculturalists, obviously, and the agriculturalist usually challenges the nomadic pastoralists. Okay? The agriculture is considered the more advanced of these three economies. Okay? And they form different groups. Again, you have different political units based off of the economy. Now we can look at them as saying, oh, they have different physiques, which is coincidental, not necessarily because again, the sand people we just saw, they're not pygmies per se, or they're not tiny per se, but they are. And again, pygmy is not a good word. That's why I hesitate to use it. But they're not that, but they are hunters. And the Fulani, for instance, or the Arabs are usually nomadic hunters, but they aren't necessarily tall. It just so happens that in Rwanda they did have these different traits among these different populations that may be propagated within themselves, but it's not necessarily the case with the economy. Notwithstanding, you see that your culture and your politics is formed around your economy. And now, essentially, their genetics started forming around their economies too, which is pretty interesting. Or their phenotype started following around with their economies. So, in any event, it was their political and military achievements rather than their height which distinguished the Batutsi from a historical viewpoint. The contribution to the Kingdom of Rwanda goes back to the 14th century to a period contemporaneous with the Bachwezi. They were indeed strikingly parallels in actual links between Rwanda and Ankole and between Karagwe and Burundi, but unlike Bonyoro, Kitara, Rwanda in the 14th and 15th century was far from being a single political entity. There were several small chiefdoms, and it was the expansion of Central Rwandan Tutsi clan which gradually created a small compact state in the 17th century. Later still, the Central Rwanda state extended its frontier, and it was still doing so when the colonialists arrived. For instance, rulers in Wamporo, Ankole, were already paying tribute to Rwanda, which was growing at Ankole's expense. At the head of the Rwanda kingdom was the Wami. Like so many other African rulers, his powers were sanctioned by religious beliefs, and the persons surrounded surrounded by religious rituals. Feudal kings in Europe often tried to get their subject to believe that royal authority emanated from God and that the king therefore ruled by divine right. Subjects of African kings, like those of Wami or of Rwanda, other other often accepted, sometimes quite close to the proposition. Of course, in addition, the authority of the king had to be based on real power, and the Mwami of Rwanda did not overlook that fact. Rujugira. By the way, we were talking about black, like dark skin versus light skin and all that kind of stuff. I kind of want to get a black wife. I ain't gonna hold you guys. Like, you saw that complexion? I kind of want to have that. I kind of want that for my child. I'm not, like, I guess I'm not colorist per se, so I'm not necessarily going to, like, decline women who are not that complexion. But I like that complexion, and I kind of feel like I wouldn't mind having at least one descendant with that kind of complexion. Anyway, Rujigira was a famous Wami of the 18th century, and the last of the independent line was Rabugiri, known as Kigiri IV, who died in 1895. Gahindiro in another, whose praises were sung by the court musicians and historians. Each of them were associated with one or more contributions to refining and elaborating the power structure of the state, which meant that they each embodied certain historical class and national forces. The Wami Rugugira in the 18th century took the steps of placing his frontier zones under the exclusive authority of a military commander and stationing strong contingents of soldiers there. The move was significant because in any young and growing state, the most uncertain areas are those of the frontiers, known as the marcher provinces in European feudal terminology. Rujugira was in effect placing the marcher provinces under military law, and he has also put permanent military camps in strategic places. So I'm not really sure what he's talking about. Early in the 19th century, Mwami Gahinde, I started thinking about if I could have a wife or not, yeah. So, real black gentleman, exactly. It's not colorism, it's natural selection. Yeah, but I'm just saying, like, yeah, like, the good thing is that you don't necessarily have to, as an individual, only procreate with one person. You don't have to. Obviously, if you're married to one person and that's what your marriage vows were, then obviously you should only procreate with one person. If those are your vows. But you don't necessarily have to be married to one person, or you don't necessarily have to, um, like, you don't have to get married either. Now, I encourage our people to be married. I encourage our people to be married. But what I'm saying is, definitely try your best, to get your genetics replicated, like to get your genetics shared with somebody who's black, in the African sense, But of course, black and, of course, African. Period. All right. So early in the 19th century, Mwami Gahindiro overhauled the civil administration, and in each province. Again, the 19th century is like when the British are, just a world superpower. Okay, and it's like they overhaul the civil administration. Yeah, talk about the world from because remember, these people exist in a geopolitical context. They're not like right now we exist in the context of nearing multipolarity, right? If not American dominance, multipolarity, right? And so a lot of people are doing things in reference to America. So even like Uganda's laws, which Uganda is not imperialized by America in the least, even Uganda's laws are factoring in the LGBT movement in the United States of America. Even China and Russia are factoring in the LGBT movement within the United States of America. Not because America is some dominant, but because of like, yeah, I mean, I'm just saying that, like, you have to exist within a geopolitical context. So in a geopolitical context of this time, freaking England, freaking Arab world, all sorts of stuff. So in each province, there was created both a land chief and a cattle chief, one being responsible for farm rents and the other for cattle dues. Besides, there were smaller district authorities or hill chiefs within all the provinces, all members of the Batutsi aristocracy. Whether by action or design, it turned out the administrators responsible for different areas and different matters were jealous of each other, and that kept them from uniting to conspire against the Mwami. So what's interesting is this. I want you guys to pay attention to this too. So we're talking about Rwanda before the genocide. Okay, so he's calmly talking about Tutsi and about Hutu, right? not realizing that these people are going to end up slaughtering each other wholesale in a few years, a few decades after he writes this. Because he writes this in 1973. And if I'm not mistaken, well, the basically Kagame, the current president of Rwanda, stopped the genocide. Okay, so if he did it, it wasn't in 1973. You know what I'm saying? I'll just settle it that way. So the hill chiefs were for a long time hereditary within given, and again, Kagame wasn't even a twinkle in anybody's eyes at this point. So the hill chiefs were for a long time hereditary within given Batutsi clans or lineages, but under Rawonburi they became appointive, another move which strengthened central government. Meanwhile, the civil servants and councillors, collectively known as Buru, were given grants of land which were free from the intervention of the land and the cattle chiefs, thereby cementing the loyalty of the Buru to the throne. So I want people to actually, while we're reading this, try to see if he can predict the Rwandan genocide, or if he lays any sort of groundwork as to why that would happen. So the system of social relations which emerged in Rwanda were more completely hierarchical and feudal than in most other parts of Africa. Hierarchy and social legal interdependence of classes and individuals were features found in the army, the civil administration, and in the social fabric itself. The key to everything else was the control over cattle through an institution known as ubuhake. This meant that the poor in cattle and those of low status by birth could approach anyone with more cattle and more respected status and offer his physical labor service in return for cattle and protection. The cattle were never given as outright property, but only the usufruct was handed over to client. Therefore, the client could have the use of the cattle for so long as he reciprocated by handing over milk and meat to his overlord, and for so long as he remained loyal. Of course, the peasant on the land also had to perform labor services and provide tribute in the form of food. The Batutsi aristocracy fulfilled their function of offering protection, partly by making representations at the Mwami courts or by defending their dependents in local legal cases. Above all, however, the protection came through specialization in the military art. Ever since the 15th century, there was compulsory military service for certain Batutsi lineages. Sons of the Batutsi aristocracy became royal pages, receiving all of their educational training within a military context. Each new Mwami made a fresh recruitment to add to existing forces. Some Bahutu were associated with particular regiments to provide supplies, and the Batwa were also incorporated as specialist archers with poison arrows. Ooh, that's nice. Of course, the protection with the Batutsi gave the Bahutu was a myth, in the sense that their regarding was their exploitation of Bahutu. See, like I'm saying, again, everything is just so bad. And it's like protection is a real, like I tell you guys, like I'm starting to wonder if I should say in my book, watch the movie 13 Samurais. It's a classic film. I don't know if it's from Japan. I think it's from Japan. But it's a classic film. And it tells the story of how the peasants hire samurais to defend against the bandits. I feel like I'm talking about this all the time. But after the samurais defend against the bandits, I think there's like 13 samurais, a couple of them die, right? The samurais conclude, you know who benefits from this whole situation? The peasants. Being protected by somebody else isn't them exploiting you. They are giving their lives to protect you. Like America's army is not exploiting me per se, if I'm living in America safely from invasion. Now, granted, you might say, there's not that many invasions of America. Absolutely not. But partly the reason because America has a fucking powerful military. I don't mean to curse, but you get what I'm saying. You can't just call military people exploiters. I'm not saying that you can't exploit when you're a military person, but the thing is this. It's either they exploit you, not they exploit you, but it's either they collect payment or somebody else collects payment. And you might say, well, that's exploitation. No, that's the freaking planet. That's the planet. There are people with land and there are people without land. And people without land, if they have guns, we'll get something to eat. Anyway, they defended them from external enemies so that the population became dense and plentiful. They defended them from external enemies so that the population become dense and plentiful. So you think that they should do this without anything for free? They conserved the Bahutu so that the latter could exercise their highly developed agronomical knowledge to produce surplus. So what are you taught? Why is it exploitation? The Bahutu outnumber them 9 to 1. right? Because earlier he said the Batutsi were 10%, the Bahutu were 90%. And instead of saying, hey, look, I don't even know who's the one who was killing who, actually. And I come to think about it. I don't remember. Then from external enemies so that the population became dense and plentiful. They conserved the Bahutu so that the latter could exercise their highly developed agronomical knowledge to produce surplus. Furthermore, the top stratum of Batutsi were the cattle owners, and they left their cattle to the lesser Batutsi to tend, thereby exploiting the labor and profound empirical knowledge which the common cattle herders possessed. As in, exploiting. As in Europe and Asia, such was the socio-economic base which supported a life of leisure and intrigue among the Batutsi aristocracy. So it's leisure. Like, what do you want them to do? To be trained in the military and to defend your land from external enemies. That's leisure. And this is an author. Oh no, I mean Walter Rodney. Some people say Walter Rodney might have, shot a few guns, right? But that's what I'm saying. If he did shoot a few guns, right, and shoot a few enemies, let's say he did, right? What part of that makes you think that's leisure? There was little intermarriage between Batutsi and Bahutu, and hence they are regarded as castes. The Batwa, too, can be similarly categorized, but since the castes were hierarchically placed one over the other, it was also a situation of class, and there was upward and downward mobility from one class to another to a certain extent. At the same time, Batutsi, Bahutu, and Batwa together evolved as a Rwanda nation, having common interests to defend against even the Batutsi, Bahutu, and Batwa who comprised the kingdom of Burundi. The people of Rwanda were not unique in developing a state and a sense of national consciousness, while at the same time experiencing the rise of more sharply differentiated classes and class in society. The important thing is that they were free to develop, relatively unaffected by alien influence, and certainly free from direct ravages of slave trading. Let me actually look up. I don't know who started the freaking Rwanda war, because I don't remember who was being slaughtered. Rwandan genocide. There you go. Rwandan genocide. It looks like. So now that we know who the Tutsi is versus the Hutu, it says during the 100 days, members of the Tutsi minority group, as well as some moderate Hutu and Twa, were killed by some Hutu militias. The most widely accepted scholarly estimates are around 500,000 to 660,000 Tutsi deaths. Okay, so the Tutsi, who were the minority, the target was the Tutsi population and moderate Hutus. Okay, so so the people who were being accused of being exploiters were essentially, when we talk about the Rwandan warfare, the Rwandan genocide, they were the ones who were killed off. And of course, it's not good. It's not good. But of course, in the socialist paradigm, you don't know what they're probably thinking, yay, victory against the exploiters. And it's like, yeah, you have hundreds of thousands of people slaughtered for what? Slaughtered for what? And then let me see. I think, let's see. Kagame. I want to see what group Kagame is, because Kagame. Although I think some people said that he doesn't say whether he's Hutu or Tutsi. Well, let me see. So okay, so Kagame was Tutsi. Oh man. So he said. So somebody says born to Tutsi family formed in southern Rwanda that fled to Uganda when he was 2 years old. He would spend the rest of his childhood there during the Rwandan Revolution, which ended centuries of Tutsi political dominance. So, again, it's shaped as if the Tutsi were politically dominant. Now, I'm not saying that they weren't. Eventually, after the invention of the modern state, but what I'm saying is that you put that paradigm, and then what happens is that you could feed into this. Oh, let's just slaughter them off, and then it's just a bunch of good African people, very likely being slaughtered for no good reason. But it is what it is. You can't really do much. Let's go Amazulu, and I think we'll probably end with this. I mean, well, we'll see how long this chapter is, because this is pretty long. How long was I reading for? Let me just see. Let me just double check. So it was 11 a.m. Oh, so shit. Okay, so we're gonna just see if we could probably finish this stupid sub chapter and then head out. Amazulu. The same freedom from slave trading was operational in South Africa. Woo! South Africa. Koi koi. That's the San people. South Africa for West African exports of capotates began in Angola, and East Africa exports came from Mozambique and zoned further south. The area south of the Limpopo was one that had some of the simpler social formations in Africa up to the 15th century. The eastern side, you gotta learn different African language. I don't know why I'm speaking English. The eastern side was sparsely peopled up to a late date by the Khoi Khoi herdsmen, who were slowly edged out by Bantu speakers. When European ships touched on the natal coast of the 16th century, it was still a region of widely scattered homesteads, but in the years to come, the population became denser and important political military development took place. Anyone with a nodding acquaintance with the African past should have heard the name of Shaka, the Zulu leader who most embodied the social and political changes which took place in the eastern portion of South Africa. One biographer, a European, had to say this of Shaka: Napoleon, Julius Caesar, Hannibal, Charlemagne, such men as these have arisen periodically throughout the history of the world to blaze a trail of glory that had raised them high above the common level. Such a man was Shaka, perhaps the greatest of them all. The above praise song appeared on the back cover of the biography in question, and since capitalist publishers treat books less like boxes of soap powders, one has admittedly to be suspicious of any advertisement designed to sell the book. Nevertheless, all commentators on Shaka, both African and European, frequently compare him favorably with the great men of European history. It is therefore appropriate to examine, and by the way, Hannibal was not European history, but yeah. Compare him favorably with the great men of European history. It is therefore appropriate to examine Amazulu society up to the 19th century with a view to understanding the role of the leader in relationship to the development of society as a whole. Shaka was born in the year 1787, and the impressive achievements attributed to him in his 40-year lifespan can only be briefly enumerated here. By 1816, he was the head of a small Ama Ngoni clan, the Amazulu. Within a few years, he had reorganized it militarily, both in terms of weapons and the tactics and strategies of war, so the Amazulu clan became a feared fighting force through warfare and political maneuvering. And again, Shaka tells you that you can reorganize your community. Okay? You can reorganize your community. He was the head of a small clan and eventually adopted a small clan Amazulu and became one of the most formidable fighting forces on the planet. We're talking winning wars against England. Okay? So the Amazulu clan became a feared fighting force. Through warfare and political maneuvering, he united and commanded the... And again, I want to say this again. When I say winning wars against England, you're talking about this guy has only lived for 40 years. You're talking about this guy only comes to power when he's 30, like 29. Okay? So within 10 years... Okay? Within 10 years, he makes his, common folk, people with spears and such, right? Fight the British Empire. Okay? Within 10 years, he takes people with spears and he makes them able to fight the British. The same people who, I guess they did... Like, essentially, the same accomplishment that the United States or George Washington did with its huge military, with its huge, colonial apparatus, like 13 different countries. The same accomplishment that George Washington did, right, with his years of experience, so on and so forth, Shaka did within 3 years, within 10 years, within a decade. And that tells you, look, we could have had something really special if we just believed in ourselves. Or we can have something special if we believe in ourselves. But this is where we have to start emphasizing and stressing that. I think I should actually include... But see, the thing is that in my first book, I didn't really say much good about Shaka. Not my first book, my second book, Pro Black Compendium. But like, I do want you guys to realize, like, Shaka's no joke. This is the same accomplishment. That George Washington did, but with like much less resources. Obviously, George Washington was considered the richest man, one of the richest men in America, right? So one of the richest men in the world, right? And Shaka Zulu was just the head of a small clan. Anyway, I hope that kind of just sunk in for somebody. But anyway, so through warfare and political maneuvering, he united and commanded the Ama Ngoni, who had previously been divided into dozens of independent or semi-independent clans. At one point, it seemed as though Shaka was about to unite under one rule the whole of the region that is now Natal, Lesotho, and Swaziland. The task was not accomplished when he met his death in 1828, nor were his successors able to maintain Shaka's sway. Now again, you see this, and you know who killed him? His brothers. You know, sometimes you have to know greatness and take a step back. Take a step back. Sometimes you have to know greatness and take a damn step back. This man in 1816 he gets it. 1828 he's dead. In nearly a decade, he's almost able to create a formidable African nation. But where does he get screwed over? His brother. Me not say nothing, you know. Me not say nothing. You know, me not chat no more, you know. All right. So anyway, when the territory belonging to the Amazulu nation in the late 16th century was 100 times greater than the 100 square miles of the original patrimony of the Amazulu clan as inherited by Shaka in 1816. Now again, I do want to stress that I did say some, you know, I was like, this guy might have been on the crazy tip, you know, and he might have been on the harassing and abusive tip as well. So it's not like it's a perfect loss that he doesn't, so on and so forth. But like, again, now, so one of his neighboring countries, you know, does united polity necessarily to like kind of resist his pressing on them, but then it becomes that he like it could have been Lesotho. Yeah, the Soto people. It could be the Soto themselves who eventually create this, you know, a more reputable kingdom, if you will, right? With the same kind of military prowess, but not, you know, like killing people for not showing up to battle or like forcing people to be virgins and shit. You know what I'm saying? But yeah. So that's what I was saying. In 1816, it was a diminished and less powerful Amazulu that was still capable in 1876 of inflicting upon the British one of the most crushing defeats in their history of overseas adventuring at the Battle of Isandlwana. Shaka grew up at a time when the question of unity and of effective armies were being posed seriously for the first time among the Ama Ungoni. Previously, the clans, which generally coincided with chiefdoms. I actually got to write this down. I'm gonna write down Isandlwana. I feel like I should include it in my next book. Like I'm at that point where it's like I feel like I should include wars. You know, like just briefly discuss some wars. You know, so discuss wars. I want to discuss some wars, some battles, if nothing else. Cause like if you have a moment, like again, I don't know how books sell. Like I'm not really the best at selling books. I'm not gonna hold you guys, okay? But at the same time, it's like you want to give people who read your books something, you know. And at the same time, it's like I could even say this: you could ask ChatGPT for some of the filler information. For instance, I could do that right in front of you guys. Hold on a second. So ChatGPT, you guys know about ChatGPT. Now, ChatGPT is something that you want to vet a little bit, right? It's something that you want to vet a little bit, but what I'm saying is, let me see. Can you give me a detailed summary of? I'm gonna type this. Let me show you guys. I'll show you guys what I'm doing. And I know it's a little bit distracting. I know we're trying to get through the book, but it's really important. Because we really have to give to our people something. So I said, can you give me a detailed summary of the battle of let me show you. Let me see, where is it? What was the name of the battle? Oh, I think I copied and pasted it. So you say, can you give me this? And then it's like, certainly, the Battle of Isandlwana was a significant and devastating conflict that took place on January 12th. The Anglo-Zulu in Southern Africa. The battle occurred near blah, blah, blah. Here's the background. In the 19th century, the British Empire sought to expand its influence and so on and so forth. Preparations, the battle of invasion forces, approximately 15,000 well-armed, blah, blah, blah. The battle, blah, 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 Zululand, so on and so forth. Aftermath, so on and so forth, right? And so, basically, even though I don't know these wars, what I'm saying is if I could find a handful of battles, I could read this and then put it like in a paragraph. You know? Put it in a paragraph. And then, or even I could say, hey, look, condense this to a paragraph. You know, I tell it please, because you never know when these fucking robots are going to, like, destroy you. You know what I mean? So he says, look, the Battle of Isandlwana occurred on January 22nd, 1879 during the Anglo-Zulu War in southern Africa. The British Empire, seeking to annex Zululand, faced the Zulu kingdom's formidable warriors, approximately 1,800 troops As water were surprised and overwhelmed by the Zulus' army's superior numbers and tactics, resulting in a devastating defeat for the British with over 1,300 casualties. Although it was a significant victory for the Zulus, the British eventually triumphed in later battles and annexed Zululand into their empire. Ah, that sucks. The battle remained a crucial historical event illustrating the human cost of colonial conflicts in Africa, right? So again, the British lost 1,300 people. You know? They lost 1,300 people trying to do this stuff. It's not like free. But anyway, you see, let me see. With an emphasis on strategy. With an emphasis on strategy, right? And then we could try again. The battle took place on Sinai. It's notable for its tactical significance. British Empire aimed to annex the so renowned for their tactical prowess stood in their way. Zulu army employed a brilliant strategy known as the Horn Formation. They encircled the overwhelmed the British forces at Inswara, creating an opening to lure them forward and then surrounding them from all sides. The Zulu effective use of traditional weapons like the assegai and ikiwa, combined with their numerical advantage, led to a devastating defeat for the British, despite their modern weaponry. The battle demonstrated the power of well-executed traditional tactics over a larger and better armed force, emphasizing the importance of a strategic brilliance in warfare. You see what I'm saying? And this is just, and you saw how fast that was. And I'm just showing you guys this technology, or this technology, right? Obviously, the more you use it, the better it gets. So that's the downside of using it. But the good side is, like I said, I could publish a book with some information, whatever. There's some stuff you already know, but and obviously supplement it with my own knowledge, and then you could give African people more information about battles that you might not necessarily like. You might not have like the time it will take you to read all these things is monumental compared to the time it will take the computer to do it. So again, you want to emphasize the use of technology and so forth. Hopefully that was just a little demonstration, but I wanted you guys to see that that it's not yeah. All right. I actually don't know. I think I was just showing off my showing off my Zungu shit, right? Anyway, let's keep going to the reading. So Shaka grew up at a time when the question of unity and of effective armies were being posed seriously for the first time on the Ama-Ngoni. Previously, the clans, which generally coincided with chiefdoms, displayed a tendency to segment or break into smaller and smaller units. As the eldest son of a clan head grew to adulthood, he went off to settle his own kraal, and a new junior clan was born, for his father's clan remained senior, and its headship passed on to the eldest son of the great wife. The pattern of segmentation was possible so long as population density was low and land was plentiful for farming and grazing. Under the circumstances, there was little competition for resources or political power, and wars were hardly any more dangerous than a game of football in Latin America. Usually, a clan had traditional rivalries with another given clan. They knew each other well, and their champions fought in the spirit of festivity. One or two might have been killed, but then everyone went home until the rematch. Early in the 19th century, the casual tempo of Amazulu life and politics had changed considerably. A greater population meant less and less room for junior members to hive off on their own. It meant less grazing land for cattle and disputes over cattle and land. As the Amazulu began to fight more frequently, so they began to feel the necessity to fight more effectively. At the same time, senior clan heads began to recognize the need for political structure to ensure unity, the maximization of resources, and the minimization of internecine conflict. Shaka addressed himself to both the military and political problem of Zululand, which he saw as two sides of the same coin. He thought that the centralizing political nucleus should achieve military superiority and demonstrate its on other sectors. That would generally lead to peaceful acceptance of the greater political state, or else the dissidents would be thoroughly crushed. So again, he says, look, might makes right. Might makes right. The era of conflict and warfare in Zululand, and again, like I said, when I'm a younger self, I would have been like, oh, this guy's crazy. But today I'm just like, yeah, might makes right. The era of conflict and warfare in Zululand in the early 19th century brought troops face to face much more often, but the pattern of military encounters still remained that of the long-distance hurling of light ukoto or spears. For close fighting, a weapon grasped with the hands is much more damaging, as feudal armies discovered in Europe and Asia, and therefore resorted to sword and pike. Shaka, while serving as a young soldier, came up with the solution of devising a heavy, short assegai, which was used purely for stabbing rather than throwing. In addition, he discarded the loose sandals so as to achieve more speed in closing with the enemy and more dexterity at close quarters. Through experience, Shaka and his fellow youths then discovered the specific techniques of using their shields and assegais to best effect. Of course, warfare comprises not just the encounter of individual soldiers, but most importantly a pattern of tactics and strategy in relation to the opposing forces taken as a whole. This aspect of war also attracted Shaka's attention, as astounding innovation came in the form of izimpi regiments, deployed so as to allow for reserve behind the fighting vanguard and for two wings or horns capable of encircling the enemy's flank. Finally, and most importantly, an army has to be trained, disciplined, and organized so that it is meaningful unit in peace and in war. Shaka created new regiments to include men up to the 40 years of age. He kept his Nzimpi on constant exercise and fatigues so that the individual soldiers was fit and proficient, while the army as a whole synchronized in accordance with the wishes of its commanders. The Zulu army was more than, and of course, you remember this. Some of this stuff was inside of the ChatGPT description, right? So the Zulu army was more than a fighting force. It was an educational institution for the young and an instrument for building loyalties and cut across clans and could be considered as national. Promotion came through merit and not through clan or regional origin. The enforced use of the Zulu branch of family of Ngoni languages also worked in the direction of national consciousness. Over an area of 12,000 square miles, citizens came to call themselves Amazulu and to relegate their clan names to second place. Over a much larger area still, Zulu influence was profoundly felt. Policies such as curbing the excesses of witchcraft diviners and the fact that Zululand became free of internal struggles led to an influx of population from outside its boundaries, a positive contribution to the resources of the Zulu state. European travelers who have left written accounts of Zululand in Shaka's time were impressed by the cleanliness as they were in Benin in the 15th century, and they were equally struck by the social order, absence of theft, sense of security, etc., just like Arabs who traveled in Western Sudan during its period of imperial greatness. In actual fact, both the cleanliness and the security of life and property were part of Zulu life from long before, and under Shaka, what was impressive was the scale on which the things extended. Owing to the protective umbrella of the state, the people being impressed were Europeans, and the European evidence is the best evidence that it can scarcely be said to have been pro-African propaganda. One white visitor who saw a march past the 15 of Shaka's regiments wrote that it was a most exciting scene, surprising to us, who could not have imagined that the nation termed savages could be so disciplined and kept in order. A great deal more could be added concerning Amazulu's political institution and its army, but what is relevant here is to understand why a Shaka was possible in Africa in the 19th century before the coming of colonial rule. Had Shaka been a slave to some cotton planter in Mississippi or some sugar planter in Jamaica, he might have had an ear or a hand chopped off for being a recalcitrant N-word. Or at best, he might have distinguished himself in leading a slave revolt. For the only great men among the unfree and the oppressed are those who struggle to destroy the oppressor. On the slave plantation, Shaka would not have built a Zulu army and a Zulu state, that much is certain. Nor could any African build anything during the colonial period, however much a genius he may have been. As it was, Shaka was a herdsman and a warrior. As a youth, he tended cattle on the open plains, free to develop his own potential and apply to his own environment. And this is another thing to remember too. Like, I actually like this. I like this part. Okay, I kind of want to. Let's try to make sure. I'm probably gonna put this on Twitter, like this particular quote on Twitter. So let's see if I can. Let's see how I can highlight it. How do you highlight? This thing is so complicated. I don't know how to highlight. Wait a second. Maybe it's this. Oh shoot. Okay, that was it. For the only great man among the free, and it's like, this is the trouble. Like, when you're colonized by another people, right? When you're colonized by another people, you miss out. You miss out on being great. Unless, like, and he says, look, the only people that are great among colonized people are the people who are destroy their colonies. But like, you can't build in another man's country. Now, granted, you can like, you can kind of build, but like, not really. You know, like, at the end of the day, you're subject to this other white boy. Like I said, somebody owes me money, right? I can't collect it the way I would like to collect it. You know, if the white man doesn't approve, unless I pay off some cops, I can't collect it the way I like. So I have to pretty much beg the white man to collect it for me or to help me collect it, and that's what it is. Free to develop his own potential and apply it to his environment. Okay, so Shaka was able to invest his talents and creative energies in a worthwhile endeavor of construction. He was not concerned with fighting for or against slave traders. He was not concerned with the power of how to resell goods made in Sweden and France. He was concerned with how to develop the Zulu Arca within the limits imposed by its people. Resources. It must be recognized that things such as military techniques were responses to real needs, that the work of an individual originates in and is backed by the action of society as a whole, and that whatever was achieved by any one leader must have been bounded by historical circumstances and the level of development, which determine the extent to which an individual can first discover, then augment, and then display his potential. To substantiate the above point, it can be noted that Shaka was challenged to create the heavy stabbing assegai when he realized that the throwing spear broke when used as a stabbing weapon. More important still, what Shaka came up with depended upon the collective effort of the Amazulu. Shaka could ask that a better assegai be forged because the Ama and Ngoni had been working iron for a long time, and specialist black men had arisen within certain clans. It was a tribute to the organizational and agricultural capacity of the society as a whole that it could feed and maintain a standing army of 30,000 men, re-equip them with iron weapons, and issue each weapon with a full-length Zulu shield made from cattle hide. Because the scientific basis and experimental preconditions were lacking in Zulu society, Shaka could not have devised a firearm, no matter how much genius he possessed. But he could, and so again, you see that no matter how much genius you possess, you might not be able to make a firearm. You know, but he could get his people to forge better weapons, as was explained above, and he found them receptive to better selective breeding practices when he set up special royal herds because the people had a vast fund of empirical knowledge about cattle and a love of cattle herding profession. I'm going to just open something in my computer. Okay. So in the political military sphere, Shaka was following in the footsteps of his original protector, Digizwayo, and to some extent in the footsteps of Zuide, who was rival to both Digizwayo and Shaka. Digizwayo opened up trade with the Portuguese at Delagoa Bay in 1797, mainly in ivory, and he stimulated arts and crafts. So again, this is the mentor trading with Portugal. His most distinguished innovation was in the army when he instituted a system of recruiting regiments according to age grades. Previously, each locality tended to dominate within a given regiment, and in any event, people were accustomed to fighting side by side as members of their own kraal, locality, and clan. However, when all men in a given age grade were brought into the same regiment, this emphasized a greater national feeling and also increased Digingwayo's power vis-a-vis the smaller clan heads. Oh, okay, so this guy implemented age grades. Interesting. Digingwayo was head of the important Ama Umtetwa clan, and he succeeded in establishing his paramountcy in what later became the southern portion of Zululand. In the north, Zwide of the Ama Undondwe was also engaging in political consolidation. Shaka served in one of the junior age grade regiments of Digwenzwaye and remained faithful to the latter's centralizing power until Digwenzwaye met his death at the hands of Zwide in 1818. Thereafter, Shaka took up many of the military and political techniques of Digwenzwaye and greatly improved them. There is development. It is a matter of building upon what is inherited and advancing slowly, provided that no one comes to civilize you. So he's like, look, you just build off of the other person, right? Yeah, greatly improve them. Yeah. So conclusion. All right, so we're getting to the conclusion, and I think this is going to be the last part of it for today. The regions of Yorubaland, Dahomey, the interlacustrine kingdoms, and Zululand, which have so far been discussed, are examples of leading forces in the political development which was taking place in Africa right up to the eve of colonization. They were not the only leading forces, and even where the states were territorially much smaller, there were observable advances in political organization. Sorry, I was thinking about what my next podcast might be. So the regions of Yorubaland, Dahomey, and Zululand have been discussed are examples of leading forces in the political development which take place in Africa right up to the eve of colonization. They were not only leading forces, and even when the states were territorially much smaller, there were observable patterns, advances in political organization. Yeah, okay. Areas of Africa that were most... And what's interesting is this. He didn't actually talk about what Zulu did economically. What the Zulu did economically, which is pretty interesting. Well, I guess maybe cattle. I don't know. But anyway. Areas of Africa that were most advanced by the 15th century. Oh, they also had a lot of land. Oh, they had agriculture too, yeah. Areas of Africa that were most advanced by the 15th century generally maintained their standards, with few exceptions such as Congo. In North Africa and Ethiopia, for example, feudal structures remained intact, though there was a noticeable lack of continued growth. In the Western Sudan, the House of States were heirs to the political and commercial traditions of the great empires after the fall of Songhai in the 17th century, and early in the 19th century, there arose the Islamic Caliphate of Sokoto with its center in Hausaland. The Sokoto Empire was one of the largest political units ever established on the African continent, and is suffered from many internal schisms through lack of adequate mechanisms for integrating so vast a territory. Experiments to deal with the problem of unity were continued in the Western Sudan, with Islam as the hoped for unifying factor. An Islamic theocratic state was established across the Niger Bend by Amadou, and in the middle of the 19th century, while another was created by the Al-Hajj Omar of the Upper Niger. So again, you have these Islamic states, right? Most outstanding of all the Mandinga states carved out under the leadership of Samori Touré by the 1880s. Samori Touré was not a scholar like the renowned Uthman Danfodio and Al-Hajj Omar, who became, before him, had been creators of Islamic states, but Samora Touré was a military genius and a political innovator who went further than the others in setting up a political administration where a sense of loyalty could prevail over and above clans, localities, and ethnic groups. Zimbabwe too progressed with only slight interference from Europeans. Locally, the center of power shifted from Mutapa to Mutapa, that's the one. Mutapa is the one I was talking about. Mutapa to Changamire, and eventually in the 19th century, Ungunu groups fleeing from the power of the Zulu overran Zimbabwe. Right. So again, you got the people going like fleeing from the Zulu because Saka might have been, on another tip. So long as the Nguni were warrior branches of the March, they obviously proved destructive, but by the middle of the 19th century, the Nguni had already spread their own building techniques to Mozambique and what is now southern Rhodesia, and had joined with the local population to establish new and larger kingdoms infused with a sense of nationality, as was the case in Zululand. Meanwhile, across vast areas of Central Africa, striking political change was also taking place. Up to the 15th century, the level of social organization was low in the area between Congo and Zimbabwe, precisely in the areas that arose the group of states known as the Luba Lunda complex. Their political structure, rather than their territorial size, made them significant, and their achievements were registered in the face of constantly encroaching the slaving activities. On the large island of Madagascar, the several small states of an earlier epoch had, by the 18th century, given way to the powerful feudal Merina kingdom. More often than not, Madagascar is ignored in general assessments of the African continent. Although both in the physical and cultural sense, Africa is writ large, and the Malagasy people, they too suffered from the loss of population through slave exports, but the Merina kingdom did better than most slaving states because more intensive cultivation of high-yielding swamp rice and the breeding of cattle offset the loss of labor. This situation should serve as a reminder that development accompanied by slave trading must not be superficially and logically attributed to the exploited population and dislocation attendant upon slave raiding. The basis of the political development of the Merina kingdom and all others, whether or not engaged in slaving, lay in their own environment, in the material resources, human resources, technology, and social relations. So long as any African society could at least maintain its inherited advantages springing from many centuries of evolutionary change, then for so long could the superstructure continue to expand and give further opportunities to whole groups of people, to classes, and to individuals. At the beginning of the section, attention was drawn to the necessity of reconciling a recognition of African development up to 1885 with the awareness of the losses simultaneously incurred by the continent in the epoch due to the nature of the contact with capitalist Europe. That issue must also be explicitly alluded to in its point. It is clearly ridiculous to assert that contact with Europe built or benefited Africa in the pre-colonial period, nor does it represent reality to suggest, as President Leopold Senghor once did, that the slave trade swept Africa like a bushfire, leaving nothing standing. Okay, so he's like, look, it wasn't that devastating. It was devastating, it wasn't that devastating. The truth is that a developing Africa went into slave trading and European commercial relations as the gale force wind, which shipwrecked a few societies, set many others off course, and generally slowed down the rate of advance. However, pursuing the metaphor further, it must be noted that African captains were still making decisions before 1885, though already forces were at work which caused European capitalists to insist on and succeed in taking over command. Okay. Woo! All right, that's it. That's the podcast. So Bit of Medicine says, wait a minute, wasn't I saying this the other day? They can sabotage you, etc. Who, the Europeans can sabotage you? Is that what he said? But yeah, Europeans definitely sabotage you. You were talking about in Bakari's chat? I kind of missed that. I know you and Bakari were typing, but because you were typing, it was a little hard to follow. Because I didn't really realize what was happening in that conversation at the time. Because it was like 1 a.m. or something, right? But like, yeah, the European could definitely sabotage you. I think anybody can sabotage you, honestly. I think your own people could sabotage. Like I said, with regard to what happened with Shaka Zulu, like his brother kills him. You know? So like, yeah, might is at the end of the day, like, who has the might? And the people who are stronger than you can often, get you to do things. Like I said, even me, if I'm trying to handle something, my own business, I have to appeal to the state. Like, even if you want to, like, for instance, if you want to marry a woman, you have to appeal to the state. If you want to divorce a woman, you have to appeal to the state. If you want to divorce a woman and you say, and you have common property together, or like a child, for instance, or you have a house, right? You can't just say I'm taking a house and I'm taking a child. You can't say that, or you can't say you're taking a house and you're taking a child. You can't do that. You have to go to the state, and the state will say, okay, I'll tell you where the child's going. I'll tell you where the house is going. I'll tell you where your paycheck is going. You know what I mean? So, and the reason why the state could do that because the state has the force. Where if you say, well, fuck you, I'm going to do whatever I want, the other person can say, well, I'm going to call the state. You know, I'm going to call the state. And the state's going to make you do what the state wants you to do. You know? So in that sense, it's like we as African people should not live in European states. Now, granted, the Europeans did go to Africa and set up their own states. And the thing is, yeah, they did go to Africa and set up their own states, and that's going to be the next chapter about imperialism and colonialism. Nevertheless, you know, when they didn't set up their own states, you had much greater autonomy. And now that they are not in Europe, now that they're not in Africa, as colonial entities, you have much greater autonomy. It's not to say that you could do anything you want, obviously, right? Because might still makes right, but you know, yeah, you have much greater autonomy. But you don't have that autonomy when you're in their state. And that's the thing that we tend to ignore, is that we tend to look at it from, oh man, they have absolute autonomy. Yeah, in America has absolute autonomy. You know, if America says, look, I don't want, like, we're going to close your business, it'll close your business. If America says, we're going to take your land, eminent domain is in the freaking Constitution. They can take your land. And they're going to say, we can compensate you for this much. That's what they're going to compensate you by. So yeah, that's it. So I guess we have no other comments. So look, I appreciate everybody for coming through. Maybe I should give an overview of everybody who showed up. We got Tyler, obviously. Tyler was here, which was great. Highly Favored was here. So shout out to Highly Favored. Brother Bakari, Real Black Gentleman, Buana, Casidra, and of course, Brother Koku. Hope everything goes good with him. But yeah, those were. I'm glad that you guys came through. Obviously, check out all the podcasts on the network. But beyond that, I guess if nobody else has anything to say, thanks for joining me today. And of course, Shemem Hotep, Anku Ja Seneb Neb, Amen, Ma'at, Dua, Necher.